carefulness in defining operational control? Are we maximizing the resources that we have to deliver the most effective results? And under that definition, we are doing so very much to gain operational control. So that is my response with respect to the Secure Fence Act of, I believe it is 2007, a response that when given the opportunity to provide to Congress under oath, I actually have delivered multiple times.
So this budget that you're before this committee today, does that budget move you toward that goal?
We believe it does, Ranking Member Thompson, and I should say, this year, for the first time since 2011, we have been budgeted to receive an increase in the number of Border Patrol agents. The first time since 2011, 300 to be precise. Next year, for our fiscal year 2024 budget, we request an additional 350 Border Patrol agents as just one example of how this advances the security of our southern border through the extraordinary work of our personnel in the department.
And let me say for the record that in each time that the request for increasing the numbers in the Border Patrol, Democrats on this committee have always supported the increase. It's been my Republican colleagues who've opposed the increase. So either you're going to support the Border Patrol and securing the border, or you're not. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Just point of clarification, my comments were not about the content of the definition, the fact that you said the definition was happening. You said, I did. That definition, yes. So it was about integrity and not about success on that particular point. I now recognize Mr. Higgins from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, your stand in your testimony today regarding operational control of our southern border, which by any reasonable man's definition has certainly been lost. You're standing on a word in the legislation that gave birth to the specific law saying all illegal crossings and no one's ever. We'll take a drip. America be okay with that? Would you and your execution of your inaugurated president's policy have given Americans a flood? We've identified over 11 laws that you violated. Some of the most egregious, the Secure Fence Act, 2006, concerning operational control. Immigration Nationalization Act 236, Section C, 8, U.S. Code 1226, concerning detention. INA 241, Section A, 2, U.S. Code 8, 1231, concerning detention. Immigration and Nationalization Act, Section D, 5, Alpha, 8 U.S. Code 1182, concerning parole. We've given you ample opportunity to seek some sort of honorable exit from your executive position, sir. We take no pleasure in witnessing you dismantle yourself as a fellow American before the whole country. Your legacy, millions of illegals enter our country, millions under your watch, loss of operational control of our border, aligning DHS policy as an asset to Mexican cartel drug and human trafficking, the disintegration of our national sovereignty, destruction of countless thousands of Texas family lives, overwhelming crime waves sweeping across our country, over 1 million criminal runners you call gotaways flooding into America, many carrying backpacks loaded with deadly fentanyl and meth, or herding teenage girls into prostitution, sex slave networks across America. 225,000 Americans dead from Mexican cartel drug overdose since you took office 2 years ago. You and your inaugurated president, but mostly you, sir, because you have your whole mind about you. And you have a highly decorated background in border operations, so you're supposed to be the expert. You, sir, are the Secretary of Homeland Security who has failed in your sworn oath to protect our nation from invasion. You had an obligation to execute the president's policies or advise the president if his policies were bringing injury to America. Ultimately, your oath requires you to secure our nation's sovereign border with Mexico and do anything necessary to stop the Mexican cartels from trafficking endless wave upon human wave of illegals into America, along with miserable death, unspeakable grief, graveyards filled from sea to shining sea with the bodies of American sons and daughters dead from fentanyl. You've brought generational trauma upon our country. I believe history will witness your era of service as a transitional time in our country. Well, what was America like before Secretary Mayorkas, and what was America like after him? It's stunning that you could sit there and smugly grin as if you've not miserably failed your country. We could give you money to hire 1,000 new border agents. Nobody wants to work for you. They're coming forth. We can't keep up with the whistleblowers that are coming to testify against your command. We could give you money to deploy all sorts of new technology. I have evidence in my file that you've given command to not deploy technology that you currently have because it interfered with the cartel's business model. We're done with your lies to America. It's shameful what you brought upon our country. Mr. Chairman, I have no interest in asking this secretary any questions.
Mr.
He
Chairman.
obfuscates and lies.
Mr. Chairman.
I yield.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Ms. Jackson Lee.
Mr. Secretary, I'll give you a moment, but my question is before, as I start my questioning, and you know time is short, do you take an oath, and on behalf of the men and women of the Department of Homeland Security, particularly those responsible for border security in the North and the South, to protect the American people, and are you doing it in the best manner, the securest manner, the honest manner with integrity to save the lives of the American people and to ensure that hamlets, cities, counties, and otherwise are safe and that our domestic security is safe?
Yes, I am, Congresswoman.
And did you want to have a sentence responding to the gentleman?
No, I've chosen not to. Thank you.
And so under oath, your answer is yes. And that is on behalf of yourself and those men and women that are now serving as we speak at the border, both North and South.
Yes, it is.
My Republican colleagues have been painting quite the picture today, and to hear them tell it, you inherited a secure, orderly situation at the border. I, for one, have been to the border many times in the midst of mass confusion, and everything would be fine. That, of course, was not under your tenure. If only you had kept things just as they were, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, I know that many members of Congress only pay attention to the latest news cycle and whether the clip of their 5 minutes at this hearing will go viral. But some of us remember the previous administration and its disastrous border policies. As a 20-year member of this committee, I truly believe that comprehensive immigration reform and border security must not be partisan, it must be nonpartisan. And in actuality, that is not what we're facing today. We're here for your budget presentation, the dollars you need to continue to safeguard our cities, counties, and states. So I'd like to direct your attention to a couple of images. One that you will see shortly deals with the DHS office, was taken by the DHS office of the Inspector General at a Border Patrol station in McAllen, Texas in June 2019. Reports on the overcrowded conditions at this and other facilities found that migrants, including many children, had not been able to shower in weeks, were not fed adequate food, were getting sick from flu outbreaks. Women and children were forced to drink from toilets when they had access to running water at all. Hundreds of children were detained for more than 72 hours in violation of the law. And that was when our Border Patrol agents and others were overwhelmed. I was present during those times in the past administration. And tragically, many migrants died while being held in these kinds of conditions, including at least 5 children. I guess this is what Republicans' idea of operational control. Mr. Secretary, would you please remind me who was president in 2019 when this photo was taken?
Congresswoman, that was President Trump.
That's right. Now, at least in this picture, children seem to be with their families. Let's move on to the next image. In May 2018, the prior administration announced a zero-tolerance policy, which resulted in children being torn away from their parents. I was there then, including U.S. citizen children, American kids. Worse yet, the administration had no plan to track family separation and allow for reunification. As of a couple of months ago, more than 1,000 children have still not been reunited with their families. Now, some might say that child separations and death in custody are just the cost of achieving border security, and if we reinstate the previous administration's policy, we could keep the border. I find that despicable. However, the truth is that these policies weren't even effective in securing the border. In fact, Border Patrol recorded 41% more illegal entries in the fiscal year 2019 under the then president during the last year, during the last year of the Obama administration. Again, Mr. Secretary, just in case people don't remember, the president was at the time of this picture that speaks to a child during that time frame.
Congresswoman, that was President Trump.
You're right again. So let me, in my final question, ask, as a refugee yourself, do you believe the inhumane and ineffective border policies of the Trump administration really equal to operational control? And does your budget reflect your serious commitment to ensuring more personnel, morale boosts, and to be able to do this job so we safeguard and secure the American people? Mr. Secretary.
Congresswoman, the policies of the past administration, those that were cruel and inhumane, not only did not achieve operational control under the definition of the Secure Fence Act, they also disobeyed our values as a country. Our budget that we have proposed for fiscal year 2024 advances the position of this department to gain operational control under a reasonable definition. As all secretaries have said, it is unachievable to prevent any alien during a year from crossing the border, not a single one.
The gentlelady's time is up. The gentlelady yields. We'll have to get that New York Times article out that's about the migrants being enslaved. I recognize Mr. Guest from Mississippi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we know that earlier this week, DHS released its national encounters by month. March, the 6th highest month on record ever, with a total of 257,910 immigrants that were encountered just last month alone. We know that fiscal year 2021, that we set a record for encounters of over 1.9 million. Fiscal year 22, we shattered that record with more than 2.7 million encounters, and currently we're on pace in fiscal year 2023 to break that record once again. March marks the 12th straight month that we've had more than 200,000 encounters, and the 24 straight months that we've had more than 185,000 encounters. We see what is going on the border just within the last 2 weeks. We see that information there behind me. Chief Ortiz put information out on April the 7th. He called it his week in review, which he does every week. For the week of April the 7th, 4 agents assaulted, 34,000 apprehensions, 10,800 gotaways, $80,000 seized, 580 pounds of marijuana, 202 pounds of fentanyl, 15 pounds of meth, 12 pounds of heroin, 2 pounds of cocaine, 10 firearms, 14 sex offenders, 9 gang members, and 4 individuals arrested with outstanding warrants. All that in the week of the 7th of April. The week of April the 14th, the Chiefs Week in Review, and another 11 agents assaulted, 34,600 apprehensions, 10,100 gotaways, 1.24 million seized, 146 pounds of methamphetamine, 106 pounds of fentanyl, 39 pounds of ecstasy, 14 pounds of cocaine, 29 firearms, 11 sex offenders, 7 warrants, and 4 gang members. Just last month, at a field hearing down in McAllen, Chief Ortiz was asked about the border being secure. He gave an answer that I thought was very truthful, very forthcoming, when he said that he could not testify before this committee that the border was secure. He actually testified that 5 of the 9 sectors along the southwest border were not secure. And so my question to you, Secretary Mayorkas, is it your testimony that all 9 of the southwest sectors from the Rio Grande Valley to San Diego, that under whatever definition you use, that you believe that all 9 sectors are secure?
Congressman, you and I have spoken about this issue before, both under oath and in your office. I do not understate the challenge that the border presents.
And I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm very limited on my time. It's yes or no. Do you believe that all 9 sectors are secure? And I'll be happy to have a conversation with you outside of this hearing, but my time is very limited.
Congressman, as I have said before, we are devoting all of the resources available to securing the border.
So currently, yes or no? As we sit here today, based on these figures here, based upon all the figures we've had for the last 2 years, are all 9 sectors of the southwest border secure?
Congressman, it is my testimony that sectors at different times, month to month, experience different levels of challenges.
And I understand that, Mr. Secretary, and I'm not trying to cut you off. I'm asking you that today, as we sit here today, are all 9 sectors of the southwest border secure? And I'm just asking for a yes or no answer.
Congressman, I know you are asking for a yes or no answer, and the fact of the matter is that the challenges at the border are very complex and dynamic.
All right, well, I'm going to take from that if you can't answer yes, then the answer is no.
That is not true.
All right, so then you're saying all 9 are secure.
It is my testimony that the border is secure, and we are working every day, day and night, to increase its security. The challenges that we are experiencing at the border cannot be overstated.
All right, let me ask you another question, Secretary Mayorkas. Last year, fiscal year 2022, how many non-citizens were removed from the country by ICE?
Congressman, I have that.
It's 72,177. That's what was in the annual ICE report.
In which fiscal year, Congressman?
That would be last year. And the fiscal year 2022 that was released in the report put out by your agency on December the 30th. Do you know the number of cases on the non-detained national docket? You know what that docket is, correct? That's the number of individuals who have entered the country. Do you know the number of cases that are on the non-detained national docket as of fiscal year 2022?
So if I may, I believe your figure for 2022 is incorrect. I have a different figure for that.
All right, well, what's in your report, and I'm going to say what's in the report that your agency put out, and here's the report on page 16. It says that the number of non-detained cases was 4.7 million, and that was at the close of fiscal year 2022. At a hearing I held that I was in just yesterday, the director of ICE, Mr. Johnson, testified that that number is now 5.3 million and is expected to grow to over 6 million cases by the end of this year. So 6 million cases of individuals who are in the country, 1.2 million who have orders of removal, and yet your agency only removed 70,000 last year. I think that your agency is not enforcing the law, Mr. Mayorkas, and I think that you can do a better job. And Mr. Chairman, I know I'm out of time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair recognizes Mr. Payne from New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, we have such short memories in this committee with respect to the situation at the southern border. I would just like to admonish or condemn the person who came up with the idea saying, hey, I know how to stop people from coming across the border. When they get here, we'll take their children from them and lock them in a fence and forget about them and walk away. Let your children find themselves in that position. Let you find yourself in that position. It's a shame. It's absolutely a shame to use children as props, as a way to get what you want. And to also just ignore that the fentanyl problem is at ports of entry by American citizens. Whenever you hear that, you just close your ears. La, 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 la. Obviously, there is some fentanyl coming across the southern border. But the fact of the matter is, most of the fentanyl coming into the United States is coming through ports of entry by American citizens. Keep denying it. Keep not, you don't want to hear it. You don't want to know about that. You want the narrative of the southern border as the problem. Everything wrong with this country is the southern border. You should look around. Because while you're looking only at the southern border, there are folks bringing fentanyl in from every port of entry in this country. And they're doing it because they know you're looking at the southern border. Amazing. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about your budget, which is what we're supposed to be here for. But, you know, the buttered popcorn is being given out on the other side, so anyway. Let's talk about climate change. And it's a profound threat to our national security. We're seeing this threat in many of the natural disasters that are occurring more frequently and with more intensity. But my colleagues on the other side don't believe that either. In this 2021, this committee received expert testimony that stated America lost years of progress on addressing climate change due to the Trump administration's outright refusal to accept science and its work to dismantle climate science programs. The Biden administration, in contrast, has taken commendable steps on focusing on climate change. Mr. Secretary, could you please provide a few more examples of how, under your tenure, DHS is focusing on climate change and the threat it poses to our national security?
Congressman, the gravity and frequency of extreme weather events is only increasing. We used to speak of hurricanes, tornadoes, fires in terms of seasons. We don't do so anymore. As the Ranking Member Thompson mentioned, I was in Mississippi but a few weeks ago to see what a tornado could do to an entire town in just 20 seconds with winds traveling at up to 200 miles per hour. I was in Kentucky last year to see another town ripped to shreds by a tornado. In light of that, what we have to do is build communities' readiness for extreme weather events, their ability to withstand them to the best of their abilities, their ability to recover from them when they strike, and prove resilience. We have invested heavily in the Building Resilient Communities Fund. This past year, we doubled it. We are seeking in the fiscal year 2024 budget more funds to build communities and protect the American public from extreme weather events that are striking and destroying more than ever before.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Bishop from North Carolina for his testimony, or for his questions.
Secretary Mayorkas, I'm very glad that the gamesmanship about operational control is finally out in the open.
You said just a moment ago that if Congressman Roy hadn't cut you off in that hearing, I was in that hearing in the Judiciary Committee as well. You are one of the most assiduous bureaucrats I have witnessed at evading and filibustering in response when members have 5 minutes to ask you questions instead of coming forward directly. Here's what you could have said to Congressman Roy. No, Congressman Roy, we do not have operational control, but no administration has achieved the standard of operational control set forth in law. That took about 2-3 seconds. And then he could have followed up with this, and I'd like to. Secretary Mayorkas, given that illegal immigration has been setting records for your entire tenure, the fact is that under your leadership, the Department of Homeland Security is farther away from the legally mandated standard of operational control than ever. Much farther away, correct?
Congressman, our apprehension rates are consistent with the apprehension rates of prior administrations over the years. And the fact
By the numbers, if the standard of operational control is no illegal immigration coming across our border, then you're farther away from that than ever.
The fact of the matter is the migration that we are experiencing at our southern border is not exclusive to our southern border. It is gripping the entire hemisphere and the entire world.
Your policies are causing it, Mr. Secretary. Congress set an objective in law. You haven't pursued it. You have pursued its opposite. Who are you? You just said a moment ago that by a reasonable definition of operational control, you've achieved it. Who are you to displace the legal definition of operational control by this Congress in favor of pursuing one of your own invention?
I'm not displacing the definition.
Well, you just said a reasonable one is a different one, right? What do you mean by that? How is the one defined by Congress not reasonable? You understand what law means? You're a lawyer. You're an excellent lawyer. You know that not to be tenable. You're a member of the administration charged with the duty to execute the laws that Congress has passed. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, and we are doing so.
Not the operational control standard. You've abandoned it to adopt one that you say is reasonable. Correct?
Congressman, that is a definition. You're asking me whether we enforce the laws that Congress has passed, and the answer is yes, we do.
No, you don't, because Congress set forth an objective in law, and you have seen fit to disregard it. Let me ask you this. Chief Ortiz, when he testified before us in March, didn't just admit that we don't have operational control of the border, didn't just admit that the border, much of the border is not secure. There was this. I said, the cause is change in policy, is it not, sir? Will you be candid enough to be unequivocal and clear that that has driven the change? And here's his answer. I will tell you, sir, that when I was a deputy chief and acting chief down here in 2014, a lot of people described what was happening here in South Texas as a humanitarian crisis or border crisis. And I was very candid. And I said, I think we have a bit of a policy crisis. And I still hold true that we have some policies in place where we need to ensure that the men and women out there patrolling the border, investigating these criminal cartels, are actually allowed to do their job each and every day. And I said, and their job is to detain and remove immigrants. And he said, yes, sir. How about you, Mr. Secretary? Do you admit that your policies have led the country farther away from operational control of the border as defined by the Congress?
Congressman, no, I do not.
I'm not surprised. Here's your admission. Here's one of your admissions. Look at page 7 of your own written testimony. Guess what you have there? You're asking for a 342% increase in the funding for combating child exploitation. You want to know why that is? Let me tell you, because you won't tell me candidly. The reason is that your policies have led to 345,000 unaccompanied children entering this country, which now the New York Times in multiple articles has revealed what that's led to in the quality of their lives. You apparently believe this to be a game, Mr. Mayorkas. I think that's why all the acrimonious interchanges that happen over and over. Even, the last time that I asked you whether you maintain that we have operational control back in November, and you said yes, and we're trying to make it, and we're trying to do more every day. They played that on 60 Minutes. And let me tell you this, it wasn't because 60 Minutes is a fan of mine.
It is because everybody of any reasonable sensibility looks at what you have been saying and what you continue to say and recognize that it blinks at reality. And you know it. You're not delusional, but you are prepared to be dishonest with this Congress repeatedly. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carrera from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome. Thank you for being here. If I take a minute, let's talk about Congress's role in helping you do your job. Let's discuss achieving operational control. Fiscal year 2023 government funding package provided U.S. Customs and Border Patrol with over $7 billion in funding, including almost a 20% increase in Border Patrol. Not a single Republican in this committee voted for that package. Last year, 2023, this same funding package was the first to increase Border Patrol agents since 2011, as you said. Do you believe these extra Border Patrol officers help you do your job?
I most certainly do, Congressman, and that is why our fiscal year 2024 budget seeks an additional 350 Border Patrol agents, as well as other personnel.
Mr. Secretary, let's talk about fentanyl deaths in my district. I'm very disturbed, very concerned. Republicans have advocated capping the fiscal year 2022 budget at 2022 levels. Republicans seeking to essentially cut the funding for your department. That cap would essentially result in a reduction of 2,400 CBP agents and officers. Would that mean essentially that 155,000 pounds of cocaine would not be seized? Over 1,000 pounds of fentanyl would not have been seized? Over 2,000 pounds of heroin would not have been seized? How would reducing 2,400 agents at the border affect your job, sir?
Congressman, if our budget were reduced as you identify, it would gravely harm our ability to apprehend individuals who are attempting to cross our border illegally. It would gravely harm our ability to interdict fentanyl and other narcotics coming through the ports of entry and elsewhere, and cause other harm. And I should say, with respect to fentanyl, the challenge that this drug, the death and destruction that this drug causes, has been building year over year for a number of years. There were nearly 58,000 fentanyl overdose deaths in 2020 alone. This is a challenge that we all have to work together to address. Fundamentally, in the context of immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
We're dealing with a broken system and we need reform.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, if I may, without any objection, I'd like to submit a letter for the record from the Office of Leg Affairs to the Appropriations Committee that does a complete analysis of what capping fiscal year 2024 discretionary spending at 2022 levels would mean to the services at the Department of Homeland Security.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. And finally, in the last minute I have left, let's talk a big picture here, Mr. Secretary. Refugees. After World War II, there were 60 million European refugees moving throughout the world. Wars, famine, COVID-19 have an interesting way of affecting the refugee movements. You stated a minute ago that this was not only a U.S. issue, but an issue for the continent. Is Colombia having issues with refugees? Are other nations in this continent having to address challenges with refugees? Is this a worldwide phenomenon?
Congressman, it most certainly is. Our hemisphere is gripped by an unprecedented level of migration since World War II. You mentioned the country of Colombia. Colombia now is a residence to approximately 2.5 million Venezuelans who have fled that authoritarian regime. The causes of people being on the move, of course, were spurred by COVID-19 pandemic, but also because of authoritarian regimes, public corruption, extraordinary poverty, violence, and other elements that force people to leave their homes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Jimenez from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, Secretary Mayorkas, you were named to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, I believe on November 23rd, 2020. Is that correct?
I don't remember the precise date, but I think, yes.
I think
In
that's probably true.
November.
Okay. Did you and the President have discussions about how the policies that needed to be implemented in the department during the transition period?
Congressman,
That's a simple yes or no answer. Did you have discussions or not?
yes, we did.
Okay, thank you. Did you advise the President on his first day to rescind and then issue executive orders in the Department of Homeland Security, rescinding the Migrant Protection Plan, stopping the construction of the wall, and then various other executive orders that he signed into effect, actually on his first day in office?
Congressman, I don't think it's appropriate for me to speak of the deliberative process.
You mean, did he do that on his own, or did you have any say-so in that?
Congressman, I don't think it's appropriate for me to speak of the deliberative process.
Interesting. Do you advise the President on the issue of Homeland Security?
I certainly do in the course
Okay.
and scope of my service as Secretary.
All right. My colleagues on the other side say that you inherited a mess at the border. In fiscal year 2019, in March of 2019, then President Trump issued the MPP, basically the Remain in Mexico policy. And in that year, there were 977,000 encounters, according to my numbers anyway. And you could see that after he issued that executive order, that it took a while for it to take effect, but then it started to take effect, and we have fewer and fewer encounters at the border, where in fiscal 19, you had 977,000 encounters. In fiscal year 20, you had about 458,000. That's a 50% drop in the number of encounters. And then we get to the Biden administration and your time. Right after the Biden administration rescinded a lot of these orders and issued their new executive orders, we went from encounters in January of 78,000 and jumped to 101,000, 173,000, 178, 180, 189, 213, 209, 192, where we had 1.7 million encounters at the border. That's like a fourfold increase over what we had the previous year. Then the year after, it got even worse, so that we're at 2.3 million encounters in fiscal year 2022. Now, in light of this, have you advised the President to change his policies at all?
Congressman, I don't think it's appropriate for me to speak of the deliberative process, but let me say this, that the challenge at the border year to year is the function of many different factors. So, for example—
No, sir, I'm asking you, it's not about, I'm asking you, have you advised him that to change his policies, and you refuse to answer that? I understand that, fair enough, okay? And so, these numbers reflect abject failure at the border. And so somebody has to take responsibility for it, and since I guess you and he don't talk, or maybe if you do, you haven't been very effective at changing policy, then maybe we need a new Secretary of Homeland Security. And with that, I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Carter.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being with us today. The Biden administration is to be commended for recognizing that disasters exacerbate existing inequities and further entrench existing social and economic disparities. Under your leadership, in September 2021, several important actions were taken toward increasing equity in disasters. They include ending a policy that prevented many families, particularly rural families in the South, from getting help to rebuild their inherited homes after natural disasters. Secretary Mayorkas, can you explain the Biden administration's approach to supporting communities impacted by disasters?
Is the border more secure under your leadership?
I don't remember interrupting anyone when they had the floor.
I don't know who said that.
Where did that come from?
Who said something? Anybody? Video? A technical issue on the video. So we'll give you an extra 20 seconds.
Can you reset
there,
my
so,
time?
Mr.
Thank you,
Carter.
sir.
Yep.
Secretary Mayorkas, can you explain the Biden administration's approach to supporting communities impacted by disaster? How is FEMA ensuring that communities have more equitable outcomes, and how will you measure whether these efforts are effective?
Congressman, the extreme weather events are impacting many communities across this country, and it is our obligation, our responsibility to ensure that there is no community that is disenfranchised from receiving the relief to which it is entitled as a result of the damage it suffers by reason of an extreme weather event. And so one of the policy changes that we made, recognizing that some poor rural communities do not necessarily have the documents that are traditionally evidence of home ownership, to reach them where they are and how they live. And perhaps, for example, if an individual does not have a deed of trust or mortgage documents because the home was passed from generation to generation, to accept utility bills, an affidavit regarding ownership, to not leave them disenfranchised because of the traditions in that community, as well as the limited resources they have.
And Mr. Secretary, I will note that that action has made an incredible difference for not just Democrats, but for people throughout Louisiana, throughout the country, who find themselves in dire straits after natural disasters. So I commend you and the administration for recognizing that disasters don't identify party. They don't identify race, and neither has this administration. I appreciate that. While these policies should be commended, I'm concerned about the National Flood Insurance Program's new Risk Rating 2.0 system. The new Risk Rating 2.0 system may leave my constituents, especially in low and moderate income communities, priced out of their homes by premium increases, or they may have to choose to forego coverage entirely. As climate change worsens and brings about more frequent disasters, which may increase flooding risk, how are you ensuring communities like mine that are negatively impacted by flood insurance plans that are supposedly aimed to help, but in fact, sir, respectfully, are doing just the opposite?
Congressman, there are two efforts underway. Number one is, as you know, and as you and I have discussed in the past, we have significant grant programs that are intended to reach communities and help them rebuild, as well as to prevent harm from initially occurring. We are reviewing our grant programs to ensure that, again, they leave no community disenfranchised. We are reviewing and need to continue to review the Risk Rating 2.0, given the concerns that have been expressed with it, and I can assure you that we are doing so, and we will report out our results.
Thank you. Risk Rating 2.0, as we've said repeatedly, is a game changer for many people. Some people have to make a determination, can they live in the home that they've always enjoyed? Can they live in the community that they've always enjoyed? So I'm happy to hear you say, Secretary Mayorkas, that this is not a done deal, that there is an opportunity for revisiting with the recognition that it has caused harm and we should modify. So with that, sir, I thank you very much, and I yield back.
The gentleman had a little extra time if you want to take it. You're good. Okay. The gentleman from Louisiana yields. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a sad day. America's security has never been weaker than it is under the Biden administration. In your reign as Secretary of Homeland Security, on March 13th of this year, a Texas DPS trooper attempted to stop Rashian Comer for speeding, and Comer refused to stop, and a reckless high-speed chase ensued. And at one point during this chase, the suspect began to nonchalantly live stream himself driving at 105 miles per hour and evading the police officer behind him. At the same time, a 71-year-old grandmother and her 7-year-old granddaughter were on their way home after a play date. Their names were Maria and Amelia Tambunga. Maria is the mother of two of my constituents. As Maria passed through the intersection of State Highway 163 and I-10 Service Road, Comair blew through a red light and struck Maria and Amelia's vehicle. They were pronounced dead at the scene along with two other people. After law enforcement secured that scene, it was revealed that Comair was a human trafficker smuggling 11 illegal aliens in his truck, evading the law. Over the last few weeks, I have heard countless stories of this beautiful 7-year-old girl, about Amelia and Maria, about how Amelia was an outgoing fashionista. She wanted to be an influencer, about how she loved to play with her friends and dance with her Aunt Jenny and cook with her grandmother, Maria. I'm wearing a pink tie today, Mr. Secretary, in honor of that little girl. Most importantly, Mr. Secretary, the Tambunga family is here today. Emilio, Maria's husband, and Amelia's grandfather, Elisa, Maria's daughter, and Amelia's mother, and Virginia, Maria's daughter, and Amelia's aunt. They're sitting right behind you. They came here today because they want answers. They came here today because of the failures of you and your leadership. They came here because they want closure. They deserve answers. Mr. Mayorkas, will you turn around and offer them your condolences and an apology for the failure of your administration that led to the death of their loved ones? They're right there. They're standing right there.
Congressman.
Mr. Secretary, they're standing there, and I think they deserve an apology from you.
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, may I stand and turn my back?
Certainly.
Our heart breaks for your loss. Our heart breaks for the loss of all victims of criminal activity.
It is a failure of the policies that have allowed hundreds of thousands of families to go through this grief. They want to meet with you today, Mr. Secretary. I'll host it in my office. Will you commit to meeting with them?
Congressman, I most certainly will, as long as you
Thank
do
you.
not politicize the meeting. because
Mr.
this is
Secretary, the only person
tragedy.
politicizing anything here is you. The security of this country is not a political matter. In fact, on September 21, 2021, you told me in this committee room that the border was secure. If we can play that video. Mr. Chairman, I think we have a video that is going to play. My time is continuing.
Yeah, go ahead. If you want to ask or talk about something else while they tee that up, see what's going on here with our, here we go. We'll give you a little extra time, so that took some time.
Is the border more secure under your leadership than when you started?
Congressman, the border is secure. We're executing our plan, and I've been very clear and unequivocal in that regard.
Mr. Secretary, the question is the border more secure now under your leadership?
Congressman, it is no less secure than it was previously.
Mr. Mayorkas, are you going to tell the Tambunga family that the border is secure today?
Congressman, you are politicizing a tragedy.
I'm not politicizing tragedy. They came here to Washington, D.C. of their own volition to get accountability for the loss of their family, two beloved members of their family. This year, we had a hearing at the border, which no Democrat came to. Not a single Democrat came to the hearing that we had in McAllen, Texas, and Chief Ortiz said that the border is not secure. Do you disagree with Chief Ortiz?
Congressman, let me return to what you said. Accountability is brought in a court of law.
Mr. Mayorkas.
I delivered accountability for 12 years.
Mr. Mayorkas, do you disagree with the head Border Patrol agent when he said that our border is not secure?
Congressman, I have testified to that issue.
So you do disagree with him? You disagree with your chief of Border Patrol?
I respectfully do in that regard,
You do.
Congressman.
Not a single Border Patrol agent that I've talked to in the past 3 years has said that they trust your leadership or have faith that you're keeping our country secure. I look forward to the meeting with the Tambunga family and coming up with real solutions. And I hope that all of my Democrat colleagues will meet the Tambunga family and listen to their story and understand the things that are happening in my state and in others because of the failure of these policies. And we have the answers right in front of us. I hope that every one of you will do that. You had the opportunity in McAllen, Texas, and it's time to meet with them. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Thinadar. Dr. Thinadar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Mayorkas, my colleagues on the other side have spent a lot of time today talking about securing the border, almost to the exclusion of everything else. The fact is, our border security challenges are a symptom of the broader failure to overhaul our immigration system. We must expand legal pathways for immigration, including by raising the cap for H-1B visas. In addition, DHS has a broad range of missions beyond the border that are critical to securing the homeland that deserve our attention. For example, we must make sure the Transportation Security Administration is able to carry out its mission to secure all modes of transportation. For far too long, TSA employees have labored under unfair working conditions. While frontline officers receiving 30% less pay and inferior labor protection when compared to other federal employees doing similar work. Republican proposals to address these issues have fallen far short and have only come in response to more sufficient proposals from Ranking Member Thompson and other Democrats. Thankfully, last year, Democrats voted to fund expanded labor rights and pay raises for TSA workers, which will take effect this July. Mr. Secretary, of the $1.4 billion proposed for TSA pay equity, what percent will go to the TSA's operational and frontline field positions?
Congressman, thank you. The $1.4 billion is sought for pay fairness. We have fought for this pay fairness for quite some time. I don't know the precise breakdown, but I would be very pleased to circle back with you and answer your question.
Mr. Secretary, the data I have from TSA indicates that more than 98% of the funding will go to employees working in those positions. Additionally, administering two separate pay systems within one agency would carry its own costs. Refusing to fund the initiative because a tiny fraction of funding would go to headquarters employees would be nothing more than a sorry excuse. Mr. Secretary, would you please describe what impacts failing to fund the annualization of the pay initiatives and effectively cutting TSA workers' pay would have on employee morale and the agency's ability to carry out its mission?
Congressman, the impact on morale would be quite negative, but it's not only an impact on morale. It would negatively impact our ability to recruit and retain talent at the very time that the United States' travel industry is once again prospering in a post-COVID-19 pandemic environment.
Additionally, Republicans have proposed limiting 2024 funding to the 2022 levels. However, I understand you wrote a letter to appropriators on March 19th describing some of the impacts that would have, including wait times of more than 2 hours to receive security screening at many large airports. Mr. Secretary, what kind of security vulnerabilities does it create if airline passengers must wait in large crowds for more than 2 hours to receive security screenings?
Congressman, your question goes to a fundamental point that we ensure that the public's travel is safe and secure. We also help promote economic prosperity through that lawful trade and travel. And this, not only would the security be impaired, but also the facility of travel as well as trade would be impaired if our budget is cut. That budget cut would impact negatively our department in so many different ways across so many different agencies and offices.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The TSA workers must be paid a fair wage and ensure adequate staffing levels. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Garbarino.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, there's been a lot of focus on the southern border today, and as there should be. This is my third year on the committee, and I've been to the border several times and have really seen the travesty that's happening down there, and there really needs to be a focus on fixing it. And I hope we can somehow work together to get that way. But Homeland, the department oversees several other agencies, and I have some questions regarding CISA, the cybersecurity, because that's another border that we have to make sure is protected, and CISA is required to do that. So the fiscal year 2024 CISA budget requests relatively few additional full-time employees, despite a persistent workforce shortage. In addition, 7 years after Congress gave Homeland DHS authority, it finally launched the cyber talent management system in November 2021, but public reporting indicates that hiring has been slow, painfully slow. Both factors are very concerning considering the nation's cyber workforce gap. Are CISA's current staffing levels sufficient to meet all of its current obligations?
Congressman, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Is CISA's current staffing levels sufficient to meet all of its existing obligations?
CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, is doing phenomenal work across its many different responsibilities. We do have vacancies. One of the things that we are seeking to overcome, because we are very focused on recruitment, is the pay disparity between government service and the private sector. But we have indeed engaged in an intense focused effort to recruit talent for the very reason, Congressman, that you identify.
And I have spoken with that director recently. She's coming in front of my subcommittee next week, and she has been trying to make an effort. But the department, DHS, has still not submitted CISA's force structure assessment, which is over a year late. That assessment is crucial to understand CISA's workforce and resource needs. What is the delay? When can we expect that report?
Congressman, I'll look into that, and we will get back to your office promptly.
Okay. So what concerns me is that the delay in that report, plus the delay, I think there's over 8 reports that Congress is due from DHS and CISA, and I believe there were, I don't know where the holdup is. CISA said they're done. I think, and it might not even be with you, but there is a delay in them getting to Congress. Some of them are over a year late. And we're here talking about the budget and budget requests, and these reports are how we do our oversight. That's, you know, we pass these, and we want to see what the information. We want to make sure the money's being spent properly. We want to make sure that plans are going. But we can't do that if these reports come to us late, and to have these budget requests keep coming for more money, for other money to go to other projects. We can't just keep sending money without getting these reports. So I don't know where the holdup is. There's at least 8 by my cord that are late just from CISA and DHS. So if you could have your team figure out when we will see these reports, that would be great, because there are a lot of good reports that were passed on a bipartisan level that we really need to see what's going on.
Congressman, let me assure you that we work mightily to be responsive to Congress and to be responsive to Congress in a prompt manner. One, I think the only recommendation of the 9/11 Commission that has not been adopted is a restructuring of the oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. I believe that there are more than 90 committees with jurisdiction over the department, so you can well imagine the number of reports that we are obligated to prepare. We understand the importance of those reports, which is why we work so diligently to prepare them for Congress. And I am sorry for the delay in some. We're doing the best that we can.
I understand that. Just with cybersecurity, it's another border that we have to protect, and we have to make sure that we have, not only you're acting with your proper authorities, but we have the proper oversight and putting money where it needs to be. I want to go back to the employment situation, because of how slow, and I want to emphasize this, there's a request for some more money, but last year we actually rescinded over $50 million because of how slow hiring has been at CISA. I think it was $53 million. What is the plan to make sure that we are properly staffed up and that we can do our job and make sure the federal cyberspace is protected?
Congressman, you correctly noted that in 2021, we undertook an intense effort to recruit cyber talent. Before that, we engaged in a cyber sprint that I announced earlier in that year. We are developing different models to reach talent. We understand the importance of recruitment, and we're very, very focused on it.
I'm out of time, so I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Secretary. One of the greatest threats to our nation's homeland security is the rise of far-right and racially motivated violent extremism. Over the past decade, more than 145 Americans were killed in domestic extremist attacks. The most common motivations of the attackers have been racially motivated extremism and anti-government extremism, accounting for 67% of domestic extremist attacks. Easy access to weapons of war, and particularly assault weapons, have only emboldened the extremists. Hear me now. When it comes to racist and anti-Semitic and anti-government violence, there are not fine people on both sides. The extremist who ran over and killed Heather Heyer in Charlottesville was not a fine person, he was a terrorist. The white supremacists who killed 10 people in Buffalo and 23 in El Paso are terrorists. The anti-Semite who killed 11 at the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh was a terrorist. The far-right militia group that attempted to kidnap the governor of Michigan are terrorists. The January 6th rioters are not political prisoners, they are criminals who attacked police officers. And paramilitary groups like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, and the Three Percenters wrap themselves in the flag, but they are not patriots. They are bigots with guns, nothing more. But the victims of these extremist attacks are what we should focus on, because they were innocent Americans, all of whom deserve to be alive today. Victims like Roberta Drury, a woman in Buffalo who dedicated her time to helping her brother treat his leukemia and assisting her family in running their restaurant. Andre McNeil, a father who was picking up a surprise birthday cake for his 3-year-old son. Jordan and Andre Akinoto, 2 parents in El Paso who died shielding their 2-month-old baby from gunfire. Javier Rodriguez, a 15-year-old who loved playing video games and soccer. Angie Englesby, a grandmother who raised 7 children by herself and worked multiple jobs to support them. Officer Brian Sicknick, a healthy 42-year-old former Air National Guardsman who served our country in the Middle East and succumbed to his injuries after he was beaten and maced by a violent mob of insurrectionists at the Capitol on January 6, 2021, among many others. Many of these attacks have been inspired by the racist Great Replacement theory, which falsely claims that there is some grand conspiracy to replace white Americans with non-whites in order to eliminate the so-called white race. This false conspiracy theory has seeped into the media, with some members of Congress and Fox News personalities repeating it and inspiring domestic terrorists in their heinous attacks. Now, I want to be clear because it's important not to paint with a broad brush. I commend many of my colleagues, including some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, for condemning domestic violent extremism in all of its forms. However, it is infuriating that some of our Republican colleagues have taken to cheerleading extremism, and many others have stayed shamefully silent. The fact is this: more Americans have been killed by domestic extremism over the past 5 years than by international terrorism. Cracking down on domestic extremism is vital to protecting our American homeland and our citizens. I commend the Biden administration for launching a national strategy for countering domestic extremism, and I encourage you, Secretary Mayorkas, and the administration to continue to prioritize this growing threat. I ask you, Secretary, can you describe the efforts of the Biden administration to combat domestic extremism?
Congressman, we have taken a number of different steps over the past 2 years to address this increasing threat. I created a domestic terrorism branch within the Office of Intelligence and Analysis. We have increased the level of our information sharing to state, local, tribal, and territorial partners so that they understand the threat landscape in their respective communities. We have increased our grant funding to equip and empower communities to address the threat. We are sharing best practice models on how to detect and intervene when an individual is moving towards violence by reason of an ideology of hate, anti-government sentiment, personal grievance, whatever the motive. We are focused on the connectivity between an ideology and violence. It is violence that we are focused upon.
Thank you. My time has expired, so I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes the former chairman of this committee and the current chairman of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Mike McCall from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just want to say in response, what about the 100,000 Americans who have died due to fentanyl poisoning? More than Vietnam over 20 years in just 1 year. You know, Mr. Secretary, you and I are federal prosecutors on border states. We've known each other for a long time. When you took office, we were securing the border. You said that you have operational control. But last month, your Border Patrol chief, Mr. Ortiz, testified before this committee that DHS does not have operational control of the border, and I agree with him. In my 20 years in Congress as a former chair of this committee and as a federal prosecutor tasked with securing the border in Texas, I've never seen this border more out of control. And I believe it's because on day one, you rescinded the migrant protection protocols, otherwise known, remain in Mexico. And at that time, 2 years ago, you said it was necessary to terminate this program that was working because, quote, it was unjustifiable human cost associated with it. But I ask you, is it justifiable that migrant encounters have risen to 5 million people since you took office? Is it justifiable that more than 100,000 Americans have died from fentanyl flowing across the border? Is it justifiable that 98 suspected terrorists attempted to enter the homeland last year alone? And who knows how many have made it in? When I was chairman, I wanted that stat every week I got briefed. Is it justifiable that at least 12,000 criminals attempted to enter the homeland last year? 1,000 with assault-related charges and 62 with homicide-related charges. Is it justifiable to human costs at least 853 migrants died trying to make the dangerous journey across the border last year, the most on record in the history of this country? I don't always quote CNN, but they had a phenomenal documentary, The Journey, the dangerous journey from South America to the United States. Is it justifiable that in my state, first responders found stacks of bodies, that's a quote, abandoned by human smugglers in a trailer who suffocated to death? Are these human costs justifiable because they align with your political agenda? Because I don't think any of these things, none of this is justifiable. This is the biggest human trafficking crisis of my lifetime. And you, sir, are complicit with it. I've been down there so many times, but now it's completely out of control. What are we going to do with 5 million people that have no legal status in this country? How do you deal with this problem? They're going to live in the shadows. Where are they going to go? The women, the girls are going to be sex trafficked, and the young men are going to go to MS-13. That's going to be their family. And you know it. And I know you know it because you know better. You're a smart man. You were a U.S. attorney like me. That's why I'm supporting our bill that we're going to mark up to try to get control of this thing once and for all. And as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm going to compel this administration to renegotiate remain in Mexico. You know, in the final analysis, sir, your job is a solemn one. It's probably one of the most important cabinet jobs because your job is to protect the American people from threats. Your job is to secure borders, air, land, and sea. And in my judgment, and it's hard for me to say this, I've known you for quite some time, but you have failed in your job. And I think you know this. And I agree with our Border Patrol agents. This is one of the most, to me, most profound things that I saw in your tenure when you went down to the border and the Border Patrol agents turned their backs on you because, quote, you have turned your back on them. I think that speaks volumes about your tenure in office. For God's sakes, work with us to get this done. It is out of control, and it's at great human cost, and none of it's justifiable. And one rescission, one stroke of the pen, rescinding migrant protection protocol, remain in Mexico, was a direct cause and effect. And your agents on the border tell me this. What caused this crisis, I ask? It's because the president rescinded remain in Mexico because they couldn't get in the United States before that, and now they get in, and it's catch and release all over again, and now we have this crisis at the border. So I know my time is running out, but I would like to entertain any response you have.
Congressman, you invited me to work with you and work with this committee to address the challenges at the border, and I welcome that invitation, and I accept it. Our immigration system has been broken for decades, and it is in dire need of legislative reform. You ask about what is justifiable and what is not. Evidence of a broken immigration system is compelling for years and years. Do you know that in the years 2006, 2007, 2008, there were more than 1 million gotaways per year? The challenge of fentanyl, you and I have both prosecuted narcotics trafficking cases. I have prosecuted cocaine trafficking, methamphetamine trafficking, black tar heroin trafficking. We've seen nothing.
I know my time has expired, but we're going to sanction China for the precursors coming in, and my bill will sanction Mexican officials for being complicit with this drug trafficking that's killing 100,000 Americans, for God's sakes. And you, sir, I believe are complicit with this by your inaction at the border.
Oh, we are taking more action than...
The gentleman's time has expired, and gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Swalwell from California for his 5 minutes question.
Congressman.
Mr. Secretary, you want to respond to that?
Can I
Go
take
ahead.
20 seconds?
Yep.
To say that we are doing nothing is an absolute falsehood. We are taking it to the cartels. Do I think that nearly 58,000 fentanyl overdose deaths in 2020 are quote-unquote justifiable? This department has worked to stop the trafficking of narcotics since its very inception. And we both know very well that the drug problem in this country requires a two-pronged approach to address the supply and to address the demand. And this fight continues, and we are taking it to the cartels in an unprecedented way. And Operation Blue Lotus that we launched in the middle of March is one powerful example of what we are doing to only increase our effort to address this scourge that is killing so many Americans. But to say that we are doing nothing is unequivocally false.
Mr. Secretary, you oversee one of the largest law enforcement personnel in America. Is it the position of the Biden administration to fund or defund the police?
It is to fund the police.
And does that include to also train them to catch the bad guys and also not to harm the good guys?
Congressman, that is the sworn oath of officers.
And you would agree that unlike any time before in our history, police officers are in danger today. They have a target on their back, violence committed against them.
Congressman, I know that law enforcement officers are under tremendous attack.
And do you think go ahead, do you think anti-police rhetoric hurts morale or helps morale as you're trying to recruit people to be law enforcement officers?
Congressman, it hurts morale, and that is why it is so important that law enforcement leaders continue to communicate the nobility of the law enforcement profession. I'm very proud to say that.
And does anti-police rhetoric put targets on the back of law enforcement for their safety?
Congressman, it does.
That's why I'm disturbed about a recent tweet from the former president that says Republicans in Congress should defund the Department of Justice and the FBI. I'm also concerned about people on this committee and their own anti-police rhetoric. This is a defund the FBI campaign effort. Again, thousands of FBI agents who work hard every day to take bad guys off the streets. In fact, after the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago, someone armed to the teeth went to an FBI field office to try and kill FBI agents. I'm also concerned that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee invited a witness. When you could have any person who walks this earth as a chairman of a committee to come in and testify, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee invited the author of this tweet.
Will the gentleman
said,
yield?
F
Will the gentleman
cops.
yield? Will the gentleman
Mr.
yield?
Chairman, Mr. Chairman.
Personal inquiry.
Troll is interrupting.
He's not yielding.
I'm not
The gentleman is recognized.
So it concerns me that there is this anti-police rhetoric that's happening among some in the MAGA Republican Party because they vote against police funding that was included in the COVID relief package. They vote against police reform efforts that would put millions of dollars in community police officers on our street. They vote and are against the union protections that allow them to collectively bargain. And as we honor the hundreds of January 6th officers who were hurt that day, too many of them gave comfort and aid at the DC jail. I also want to ask, is anti-Semitism on the rise in America, Mr. Secretary?
Congressman, yes, it is.
And are we seeing increases in violence toward Jewish Americans?
Congressman, yes, we are, and we are seeing that for other minority groups as well.
And so when an influencer like Kanye West, who has millions of followers on social media, says that he's going to declare DEFCON 3 on the Jews, do you think that increases threats to Jewish Americans or decreases threats?
Words like that increase the threat to minority groups, Congressman.
And that's why it surprises me that the chairman of the Judiciary Committee tweeted out, Kanye, Elon, Trump. Well, we know what Trump thinks about law enforcement and what is happening in law enforcement right now with targets on their back. But this tweet was kept up for months after Kanye West said that he was going to declare DEFCON 3 on the Jews. Mr. Secretary, do you believe that all of us have a responsibility to elevate our rhetoric and to denounce anti-Semitism and anti-police rhetoric in this country so that Jewish Americans and police officers can be safer?
Congressman, I do.
Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and now I recognize the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
That was quite entertaining from someone that had a sexual relationship with a Chinese spy, and everyone knows it. But
I move to take our words down. Completely inappropriate.
Yeah, stand by just a second while we research the rule. Give me just a second.
I need to make sure I have my full 5 minutes.
A motion has been made. The committee will suspend, and the gentleman will state the words that he wishes taken down.
Everything that the gentlelady from Georgia has said.
No, you need to be more
The
specific. Mr. Gill.
accusations of an affair with a Chinese spy, those are engaging in personalities, and those words should be taken down, and the gentlelady should not be able to speak anymore in this hearing.
That is not the latter part of that is not an appropriate motion, but we will evaluate the striking of those words. Give me just a second. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia and asks if she would like to retract those words.
No, I will not.
For those members who are wondering, we are looking into Clause 1 of Rule 17 in the Rules of the House. Okay, the chair rules that those words that were spoken are not going to be stricken from the record.
Mr. Chair.
The gentleman,
Mr. Chairman.
the gentleman from Mississippi is recognized.
I don't think there's any question about what the gentlelady said. I've been on this committee from day one. We've never had an accusation made of any member like that. And I'm appalled at it. We all ought to be embarrassed at it. We are a better committee than what the gentlelady is trying to make of this committee. So I appeal the ruling of the chair.
The ruling of the chair has been appealed. We will now, gentleman moves.
Mr. Chairman, a point of order.
Yep.
Right over here. Could you explain what part of those words are not engaging in personalities and what the basis of your ruling is?
No, we're going to let the vice chair take over the committee at this point. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table the motion.
There's been a motion to table. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the motion to table is agreed to.
Mr. Chair.
The gentleman is recognized.
I request a recorded vote.
A recorded vote has been requested. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, would the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman, yield?
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. McCall.
Aye.
Mr. McCall votes aye. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Guest. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Jimenez. Mr. Pfluger. Mr. Pfluger votes aye. Mr. Garbarino. Ms. Green. Aye. Ms. Green votes aye. Mr. Gonzalez. Aye. Mr. Gonzalez votes aye. Mr. LaLota.
Aye.
Mr. LaLota votes aye. Mr. Ezell.
Aye.
Mr. Ezell votes aye. Mr. D'Esposito. Ms. Lee.
Aye.
Ms. Lee votes aye. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Strong. Mr. Burkeen.
Aye.
Mr. Burkeen votes aye. Mr. Crane.
Aye.
Mr. Crane votes aye. Mr. Thompson.
No.
Mr. Thompson votes no. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Payne. Mr. Swalwell.
No.
Mr. Swalwell votes no. Mr. Correa. Mr. Carter.
No.
Mr. Carter votes no. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Magaziner. Mr. Ivy.
No.
Mr. Ivy votes no. Mr. Goldman.
No.
Mr. Goldman votes no. Mr. Garcia.
No.
Mr. Garcia votes no. Mrs. Ramirez.
No.
Mrs. Ramirez votes no. Mr. Menendez.
No.
Mr. Menendez votes no. Ms. Clark.
No.
Ms. Clark votes no. Ms. Titus. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Guest. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Jimenez. Mr. Garbarino. Mr. D'Esposito. Mr. Luttrell. Mr. Luttrell votes aye. Mr. Strong. Ms. Jackson Lee. Mr. Payne. Mr. Correa. Mr. Tanadar. Mr. Magaziner, Ms. Titus.
Are there other members in the room who wish to have their vote recorded? Clerk, how am I recorded?
You are not recorded.
The chair votes aye.
Chairman Green votes aye.
The clerk will report the tally.
Mr. Chairman, on that vote, there were 11 yeas and 9 noes.
The ayes have it, and the motion is agreed to. The previous motion is tabled. The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized, and we will give her the time when the clock was stopped, and we'll give you an extra 10 or 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, since you have been in charge of the Department of Homeland Security, there have been 0 miles of border wall added. There have been over 5.5 million illegal alien encounters at our border, 1.3 million known gotaways, and approximately 870% increase in apprehensions in just one sector of the northern border. American mothers and infants suffered a severe baby formula shortage, all while this administration was happily stocking the shelves for illegal aliens at one of the largest processing centers in the country. American mothers were forced to delay inductions at the Yuma Regional Medical Center because of your policies. They have flooded their maternity unit with illegal aliens. Tens of thousands of migrant children have been forced into slave labor in our country because of your policies. At least 853 dead migrants and counting, the most ever in a 12-month period, died trying to cross the southern border in 2022. And now there are over 300 Americans a day dying every single day, without fail, every single day because of fentanyl, deadly fentanyl, which is the #1 cause of death in young people between ages 18 and 45. Now we have rainbow fentanyl, which even NBC News was acknowledging that the cartels were bringing across our border, and it comes from China. This rainbow fentanyl looks like sweet tarts or Skittles, clearly made to target America's school children. It's 50 times more potent than heroin, 100 times more potent than morphine. And now, under your tenure, Secretary Mayorkas, schools all over America have to have Narcan to save children that overdose on this deadly poison. Let me explain something to you. I'm not from Texas. I'm not from any border state. I represent a district in Georgia, which is in northwest Georgia. We're not anywhere near Mexico. We're not anywhere near the ocean. But in my district, people die nearly every single day from fentanyl. And I want to know from you, how many more people do we have to watch die every single day in America? How many more young people do we have to see die? How many more teenagers? How many more parents cry themselves to sleep at night, if they can even sleep, because their child overdosed on fentanyl? How long are you going to continue this outrage, complete outrage, where China is poisoning America's children, poisoning our teenagers, poisoning our young people? How long are you going to let this go on?
Congresswoman, let me assure you that we're not letting it go on. We are fighting this.
No, I reclaim my time. You're a liar. You are letting this go on, and the numbers prove it. You can't lie about the facts, Secretary Mayorkas. While you live in denial and sit over there with this attitude that you're doing everything right, you are killing Americans with your policies. And that is a fact. Your policies are killing people, over 300 Americans a day, over 300, and it's outrageous. Let me ask you another question. We talk about charity.
The ranking member is recognized.
You know, we can disagree, but just the fact that we have people watching, you don't have to call a witness a liar. And I just...
Excuse me, does the ranking member have a point of order?
Well,
previously.
Actually, I want you to take the words of the speaker down.
So,
I mean, but I need to explain.
so the gentleman does have is
Yes.
raising a point
Yes.
of order.
So the point is, in raising this point of order,
And gentlelady's time will be restored.
you know, we have a history of being a bipartisan committee that work on solutions. Now, we can disagree, but we've gotten to the point of the language that we're using is not the kind of language that historically we, as members of this committee, we've used. And again, I just think in the interest of civility of this committee, I would implore all of the members that I understand the strength and concern, but you know, there's a way that we ought to conduct ourselves. And what I'm hearing is not how a majority of this committee conducts business, and we can do better. So I ask that the words be taken down.
Committee will suspend. The gentleman will state the words that he wishes to be taken down.
The gentlelady referenced the secretary and called him a liar.
Chair asks the gentlelady if she wishes to seek unanimous consent to modify or withdraw her remarks.
I will not withdraw my remarks because the facts show the proof.
Okay. Yeah.
So in making a ruling on this, it's pretty clear that the rules state you can't impugn someone's character. Identifying or calling someone a liar is unacceptable in this committee. And I make the ruling that we strike those words.
Sorry, just a point of order, it's a legitimate question.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did you move to take the words down or to strike them, Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, sorry, I just stepped in. Point of
Yeah,
order.
take them down.
So,
That's what we did.
Yeah.
my understanding is if words are taken down, that means that the member can no longer speak in whatever the proceeding is that those words were said.
Personal inquiry, point of personal inquiry.
There's no such thing.
Stand by just a second. So in consulting the rules of the House, when we strike, it does terminate the time of the individual who is speaking. So the gentlelady is no longer recognized. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ivey, I believe.
Can I make a point of inquiry, Mr. Chairman?
You can.
So the ruling was that because she used the word liar, that was taken down, which I agree with.
Yes.
But accusing
a statement of fact is very similar to the posters that Mr.
There's no statement of fact.
There's no statement of fact.
Bullshit.
There's no
statement of
factual
fact.
basis for the statement.
We're not here to debate this, okay? And the ruling was made by the chair that these previous words were not against the rules of Clause 1 and Clause 4 of Rule 17. But to tell someone that they are a liar is, it's pretty clear in the rules.
Slander is clearly covered by the rules. The impugnment, I can't imagine an allegation worse than the one that she just made. I mean, that has got to be in the category of taking the words down.
No, it is not. It does not fit the rules by the ruling of the chair. And we've already voted on that. It is past us. We have the secretary until about 1:30. We're going to move on. And Mr. Ivey, you're recognized for your 5 minutes of questioning.
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me say this. I appreciated your opening statement where you admonished actually Mr. Secretary about the reason the committee was formed and the department was formed, which is to protect the United States from enemies, foreign and domestic. And I certainly agree with that. You reminded the Secretary of his oath. And I appreciate that, and I recognize also that all of us took similar oaths to that. So one of the reasons I was excited about being assigned to this committee was because I thought that was the work that we were going to be doing. I thought we were going to be focusing on issues like cybersecurity. Yes, we have issues at the border, but I sure thought there'd be a good faith effort to try and address it. For example, like putting up budget dollars to address the issues, expanding resources and the like. This committee's done nothing with any of those. The disinformation issues that are before this committee, not touched at all. So I'm a little distressed. And so I got really distressed when I read your comments in the New York Times. I couldn't believe. Look, I first came to the Hill in 1987, so I understand congressional politics. I know how the game is played. But to joke about trying to have the secretary removed, let me read the quote. I know the ranking member did before. I said, on April 19 next week, get the popcorn. Alejandro Mayorkas comes before our committee, and it's going to be fun. That'll really be just the beginning for him. That is totally off the mark for what we're supposed to be doing on this committee. We were sent here not to have fun, not to eat popcorn, not to try and take somebody down. I was also amazed to see the 5-phase plan that you discussed at this donor meeting, too, on top of that. This is about raising money. This isn't even talking to a group. This is raising dollars, just like the FBI T-shirt that Mr. Swalwell showed a few minutes ago. Just like Mr. Trump raising $12 million after he makes a statement about we should defund the Department of Justice and the FBI. Now keep in mind, if you defund the Department of Justice and the FBI, who's going to deal with the types of issues, the international prosecutions that we need? And by the way, we've got another colleague that has a bill, actually, to defund the ATF. I was very heartened to see, Mr. Mayorkas, that on Friday, they didn't mention this, but there was a huge takedown of the Sinaloa cartel. The Department of Justice, working with DHS and DHA and other agencies, had a huge takedown of the cartel. And that's one of the things I think we're supposed to be talking about. I think you should be commended for that. And it's important to remember that if we don't have DOJ, FBI, ATF, to do that kind of work, it won't get done. And so all of the things we're talking about, especially the fentanyl issue, won't get addressed because we won't have the apparatus to do it. And just a quick reminder on the fentanyl piece, 92% of the fentanyl that comes into the United States is not coming across with these people walking across the border. It's coming through the ports. We learned from the takedown when they briefed us on Friday that they have planes and tunnels that they also use to bring these materials into the United States. So, we can talk about people walking across the border, and I think that's important. We should deal with it. But if we really want to get at the fentanyl issue, building a wall doesn't address it because the planes fly over them, the tunnels go under them, and the cars drive by them. And all of these are driven by Americans, by the way, or almost all of them are driven by Americans. So I hope, one last point, I got one last minute. On Monday, I went to New York City with Mr. Jordan and the Judiciary Committee. And that was ostensibly about crime in New York City. And I said at the time, you know what? I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to try and look into your heart and attribute any kind of ill motives. Things line up. I kind of wonder why we were actually there, but I'm not going to do that. But when I see this kind of statement, it was kind of an eye-opener for me. And unfortunately, it was the day after I had just made those statements in public about not attributing bad motives to the people who went up there for the committee hearing. Now I can see it's a 5-phase plan. It's an effort to remove Mr. Mayorkas and damage the Biden administration. Mr. Jordan had said that earlier anyway, but, I try and give people the benefit of the doubt.
So the gentleman's time has expired, and I'm going to make a point of clarification about the New York Times article. They did misquote me, so you might want to get with me later, and I'll give you the exact details of what I said. But some of what you said was right, some of what you said was incorrect.
Well,
But this is about Mr. Mayorkas' time here in front of the committee and not about what the chairman said about us holding him accountable and any phases that we might have in holding him accountable. This is about him, and so I now recognize.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would move for unanimous consent to enter this article into the record.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Without objection, so ordered. Let's see, we are now recognizing Mr. Gonzalez from Texas.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, for your leadership. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for coming before us. You've had a hell of a week. I'd say in my district, we've had a hell of a 3 years. I represent 42% of the southern border, over 800 miles, places nobody knew of 3 years ago that are in the news every single day. Eagle Pass, El Paso, Del Rio, Uvalde, Canipa, Hondo, Ozona. You heard from the Tambungas earlier today. Ozona is 120 miles from the southern border. And yet we're having smugglers going 100 miles through an hour in my district, killing Americans. And what I've seen is this crisis continue to spiral. And I've also seen the politics around it. It's very lucrative for a lot of people to just constantly go to the well. I do not have that option. You do not have that option. A lot of us who are trying to solve this problem don't have this option. This is what I am seeing. I am seeing, and to me, border security should bring this country together more than anything else. And I want to talk about one thing in particular when I think of border security, because I think this is something we can all agree on. Certainly you and I can. Our children. The children. If we can't agree, we need to protect American children and children that aren't Americans, we can't agree on anything else. And right now, I've got a family that lost a 7-year-old daughter a month ago. I sat with them in Ozona last week. The grandfather, Emilio, served in the Marine Corps. He's an honorable man. He served 20 years in law enforcement. While I'm sitting with him there, his phone goes off, and that's the alarm that he would go pick up his granddaughter. And so this is affecting everybody. On the other side, I see children that aren't American citizens that are abandoned in fields. One Border Patrol agent gave me a story when there was a baby that they came across that was covered in fire ants. Thankfully, they were able to save that baby. I mean, it's just an endless amount. In Canipa, a couple weeks ago, there were some illegal aliens that were found cooked to death. In San Antonio, about a year ago, 53 migrants. Guess whose district that was in? Yeah, my district. 53 migrants found cooked to death. The last administration, Democrats came out and they said, the Trump administration, no more kids in cages. I'm asking that the Biden administration have no more kids in graveyards. That's where this is at. And we need help. I spent 20 years in the military. And what I am worried about is this round and round we go, pointing fingers, pointing blame. I know you've been in this process a long time. You understand what it takes. You know how to implement some policies that work. I am concerned that the department has lost its way. And I go back to my time in the Navy, where the goal, and I hope the goal for you is the same, the goal was always make the place better than how you found it, and turn it over to your predecessor so they could make the place better for how they found it. What I see right now is it might be time for a change in DHS. And what I would like to look at is what does that change look like? At some point, I don't know how, I don't know when, at some point you will no longer be the DHS secretary and you will move on to something else. I want to see what does the department go from here? How do we strengthen it? How do we get back to making this committee a bipartisan committee that is focused on the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security being successful? I give a lot of credit to Chairman Green and his staff for working on this border package. I think there's going to be a lot of good things in there as we shake through this, as we go into markup next week. Some things that are very important to me. I think instead of demonizing children, I think we should demonize the cartels. They are the enemy. It's not each and us. It's not all of us. The cartels are the enemy. I've been pushing, I will continue to push to label cartels as terrorist organizations. I think it's important that we throw the book at smugglers. You can't just give them a slap on the wrist. We have to throw the book at the smugglers. The Tambunga family, Emilio, he's a quiet man. He wasn't asking for an apology. The man doesn't need an apology. You know what the man needs? He needs action. He wants the people that killed his wife and his granddaughter to be held accountable. So I would just ask, I have no questions for you today. You've been very generous working with me on various different things. I would ask that you look internally and you go, whenever your time is expired and it's time for you to move on, that the Department of Homeland Security have a plan to be successful for your predecessor. For that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Goldman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, is it the policy of the Biden administration to allow as much fentanyl in this country as possible?
No, it is not, Congressman. It is our plan to interdict and prevent as much fentanyl that is being sought to enter the country from preventing it from being so.
And is it the policy of the Biden administration to allow as many children to be smuggled into this country as possible?
No, it is not, Congressman.
No, of course it's not. And we're sitting here with a shocking lack of decorum to have a cabinet secretary in front of us who has been subject to ad hominem insults and accusations that are completely baseless. I have now counted that 6 of my Republican colleagues have not asked you a single question. They have used their 5 minutes to speechify, to accuse you of lying, to accuse you of making false statements, and what is a clear effort to try to set up, I suppose, the first step of the 5-phase plan to impeach you. Well, I have a little experience with impeachment, and I can tell you, as well as everybody else, that there is no grounds for impeachment based on a policy dispute. And there is absolutely nothing that I've seen here today that amounts to a false statement under oath. In fact, Mr. Bishop, my colleague, in referencing operational control and that standard, stated himself that it is an objective. It is the objective of the Department of Homeland Security to have operational control, and as you pointed out, that is to allow no unlawful entry into this country. That, of course, is an impossible standard, and you are certainly to be applauded for recognizing the problem that we have at the border and providing more resources and asking for more resources to solve that. I have another question, Secretary Mayorkas. If there are more encounters at the border between Homeland Security officials and smugglers, migrants coming in, you name it, does that mean that the Department of Homeland Security is doing its job better or worse?
Congressman, I'm not sure I understand your question, but let me just say this, that encounters are a function of a number of factors. And what we are seeing is an increase in migration around the hemisphere, and the factors involve why people leave their countries of origin, their home, for a better life, because of authoritarian regimes, because of extreme poverty, violence, persecution by reason of their membership in a particular social group, because of the adverse impacts of COVID-19. Our country has advanced in conquering the COVID-19 pandemic more than any country to the south. Our country has 10 to 11 million vacant jobs that are incredibly meaningful for people who are fleeing extreme poverty. the United States of America remains the greatest country in the world, the country in which so many people want to live for a better life. The number of encounters often reflect all of those factors.
Including, right, the fact that your officials are doing their job and encountering people who are trying to come across without a lawful visa. I had a whole line of questioning that I'm not going to be able to get to, but I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter an editorial into the record that is entitled in today's Washington Post, "How to Stop the Mexican Cartels?" ? Stop supplying them with guns.
Without objection, so ordered.
There are over 200,000 guns that are exported from gun manufacturers and gun dealers in the United States to Mexican cartels that allow them to control the border and send fentanyl back into this country. The laws in Mexico are incredibly strict. There is one gun store in the entire country. So if we are going to stop the fentanyl crisis and if we are going to stop the cartels, then we need to stop the exportation of assault weapons to Mexico from this country. And I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Lilota from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, month after month, members of this committee receive reports regarding fentanyl seizures, fentanyl deaths, gotaways, and other important data that paints a clear picture of an unsettling image of what is going on at our southwest border. And Mr. Secretary, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page with respect to that data. So please direct your attention to the board behind me. I'm going to ask you what should be some very straightforward multiple choice questions using data from CBP, Homeland Security, DEA, and the Census Bureau. And sir, I know that we're limited on time, so I would appreciate if when you responded, you just say A, B, C, or D in these multiple choice questions, sir. And sir, my first question is, according to CBP, how much fentanyl has CBP seized along the southwest border in FY23? And you see the answers behind me, sir.
So, Congressman, two quick things. Number one, my distance vision isn't what it used to be, so I can't actually see that. And number two, I'm not taking a multiple choice test that you administer. Let me assure you of that.
On point number one, sir, the clerk has a physical copy of the questions, so you can see them in front of you. So I'll narrate the questions, sir, with respect to the amount of drugs, specifically fentanyl, seized at the border. The answer is 13,800 pounds seized in the first 6 months of FY23. That is enough to kill 2.5 billion people, every American 8 times over, sir. The next question, sir. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, how many Americans died from synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl, between January 2021 and January 2022, your first year in office, sir?
Congressman, from approximately 2021 to the data in 2022 is not yet available. Approximately, let me give you some stats. In 2020, close to 58,000 people died from fentanyl overdose deaths. In 2018, almost 47,000 people died from fentanyl overdose deaths. The challenge of fentanyl, the scourge of fentanyl,
Thank you, Mr.
has
Secretary.
been
With respect to my question,
long.
sir, I'm going to reclaim my
With
time,
respect
Mr. Chairman. The answer is D, 71,941. That's almost 200 per day, sir. That exceeds the population of Portland, Maine. In essence, we lost a small city because of fentanyl in 2021. Next slide, please. Sir, the next question is, how many known gotaways was DHS aware of in fiscal year 21?
In 2021, I believe the number was almost 390,000.
Yes, the answer is D, 389,000 gotaways. And finally, the last slide. Sir, of which of the following cities, which of the following cities have populations less than 389,000, the same number as the known gotaways that we just mentioned earlier?
Congressman, I think you know the answer to the question. Perhaps you could provide it to us.
Well, it's actually a trick question, Mr. Secretary. Each of the 4 cities behind me are well-known American cities that have populations less than the total number of known gotaways last year. And let that sink in. America could have a whole new city based solely how ineffective you've been at securing the border, sir. And Mr. Secretary, it's clear to me by your inability to swiftly answer these seemingly easy questions that you and this committee are not on the same page. I know, sir, that you're well aware of this data, and it's unfortunate you cannot be proud of it. In your testimony, you only mentioned the word crisis once, and it wasn't even in relation to America's border crisis. In fact, it had nothing even to do with our homeland. And sir, as the leader of the Homeland Security Department, you have a duty to secure the border and to keep Americans safe. And sir, with all due respect, there is a crisis at our southwest border, and you are failing in your very important duty. And the only question remaining is whether you're doing so out of negligence, recklessness, or if it's intentional. So let this data serve as a stark reminder of the severity of the crisis at our southwest border. Mr. Secretary, time is of the essence. American lives are being lost every day, and I beg of you to please act immediately. The American people deserve nothing less. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Garcia from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your service and for being here with us today. I know that you're working under very difficult circumstances and you're trying your best with a team across many departments. And we also know the challenges that we face at the border are not challenges that you can take on your own and not just the responsibility of your department. Now, we all know we're battling a fentanyl crisis with also inadequate mental health and drug treatment programs. And we're also acknowledging the fact that drugs can be easily transported by Americans through illegal ports of entry. We've heard this numerous times today. I also just want to remind us that we also don't have legal, orderly pathways to citizenship, which forces people to come in other ways to our country. But Mr. Secretary, I'd like to get your thoughts on some proposed potential border policies that many of us have heard and that I have heard here in this Congress. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few questions about these proposed policies. Mr. Secretary, do you think it would be a good idea to fill and build a trench with alligators along the border, like actually building a moat full of alligators across the border? Would that be a good idea?
No, it would not, Congressman.
Mr. Secretary, do you think it would be a good idea to shoot migrants in the legs as they're crossing the border? Would that be a good idea?
Congressman, no, it would not.
Mr. Secretary, do you think it would be a good idea if the United States launched military attacks along the northern border of Mexico? Would that be a good idea?
Congressman, no, it would not.
Thank you, and I of course, agree with you, sir. And I just want to note that these insane ideas have been proposed by former President Trump and members of our very body here in the Congress, and so I thank you for your answers. I think it's important to note that by seeing what's happened today and the rhetoric around this really important conversation, that the majority is not really serious about any solutions, but they are serious about a radical anti-immigrant agenda and gutting any protections for the rights to legal asylum and immigration. I, like many others, remember when Donald Trump's Attorney General said that we need to take away children. Clearly a cruel statement that continues to be repeated over and over by many members of this majority. Now, House Democrats want an orderly system at the border where people have legal pathways to come, to build better lives, and where we can work together to actually solve the issues that exist along our border. And I want to thank you for your work as we continue to do that. And Mr. Secretary, finally, can you describe the importance of safeguarding the legal right to asylum so that vulnerable people can get the opportunity to build safe lives like you and I both as immigrants have been able to do?
Congressman, our asylum system is one of the crown jewels of our country. We have taken great pride since our founding to be a country of refuge for those people fleeing persecution. I came to this country with my parents and my sister as political refugees from Cuba, fleeing the communist takeover there. We understand the meaning of this country as a place of refuge. It is why I have sought to give back to this great country by more than 20 years of public service.
Absolutely, sir. And I came to this country as a young child also. I became a U.S. citizen in my early 20s. And like you, I'm a proud immigrant of this country. And it's unfortunate that so many choose to forget that immigrants make contributions to this country and can become secretaries of departments and members of Congress. With that, I yield back the rest of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Ezell from Mississippi.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for being here today. It's been a tough day. But I would like to address, since the Biden administration took office, CBP reports that nearly 1,200 Border Patrol agents have been assaulted on the job. Morale is pretty low, and these agents are being overwhelmed emotionally and physically. This increase in agent assaults should alarm all of us. Mr. Secretary, can you please tell me how you're supporting your frontline agents and your officers that are going through this ordeal?
Congressman, thank you very much for your question. We are supporting the members of U.S. Customs and Border Protection every single day. And let me share with you, you mentioned assaults against our Border Patrol agents. Such an assault is a violation of Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 111. And as Chief Ortiz and I and other sector chiefs have addressed, we are seeking the prosecution of individuals who assault our Border Patrol agents. They are doing heroic work, our Border Patrol agents, under significant challenges, and they deserve and are receiving our support.
Thank you. I'm also concerned how the Biden administration is making it more difficult for our ICE agents to do their job, adding some bureaucratic red tape. And an example from my home state of Mississippi, your department required an agent to call and ask permission from D.C. to remove an illegal alien who had been convicted of possession with intent to distribute 10 kilos of methamphetamine. Mr. Secretary, I know if I didn't enforce the law while I was a sheriff, I'd been removed from office. And will you help remove some of these obstacles, like having to call D.C. to get rid of a guy that's been convicted of 10 kilos of methamphetamine? Will you help remove some of this red tape so these guys can do their job?
Congressman, I look forward to learning more about the particular case that came to your attention, because I will tell you that the field office director in Immigration and Customs Enforcement has the authority to approve a removal. And in fact, in this administration, more aggravated felons have been removed per month than in the prior administration. Our focus is indeed on individuals who pose a threat to public safety and national security.
Thank you. It's been more than 2 decades since the Department of Homeland Security was established as a standalone cabinet-level department. The department has significantly grown. It now consists of nearly 30 components and offices with more than 240,000 employees. I am concerned about the Homeland Security as being weaponized in ways that distract from its originally intended mission. Specifically, experts have suggested that it's time to overhaul the department's Office of Intelligence and Analysis, citing the office's inconsistent struggle to provide timely and accurate intelligence. As the Secretary of Homeland Security, can you give me 3 concrete ways in which you could recommend Congress reform the Office of Intelligence and Analysis to improve the efficient flow of information?
Congressman, let me share with you that we have an Undersecretary, Ken Weinstein, who leads the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, who served as a United States attorney, has served as the Homeland Security Advisor to former President Bush, has served as the Assistant Attorney General for the National Security Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, an extraordinary leader. I'm very proud that he agreed to join our department, and he is very focused on growing the strength of the Office of Intelligence and Analysis. And one of the ways in which Congress can do so is to properly fund that office, which is so critical to equipping not only the federal government, but also our state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus partners in securing communities across this country. The men and women, the personnel of the Office of Intelligence and Analysis are extraordinary public servants, and I'm incredibly proud to work alongside them.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman from Mississippi yields. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez of Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman Green and Ranking Member Thompson, for convening us in today's hearing. I gotta move a little so I can see you here, but I wanna start with thanking the Secretary and acknowledging that your work is constantly politicized. And while the border is in your portfolio, it is not the only department's responsibility. as you're also responsible in addressing issues when disasters strike. You're responsible in protecting our economy, securing cyberspace, and critical infrastructure. Why are we not talking about those issues who we know continue to expand the threats to our country every single day? My colleagues to the right only care about the border because they want to carry the narrative that asylum seekers and refugees are illegals. They're an invasion. When we know this is really about a denial of human rights and our commitment to being a country that welcomes immigrants the way we've done in generations before. What we should be discussing today is when is Congress going to pass a law to increase access to legal representation for individuals, making sure families are kept together, and providing a pathway to citizenship for dreamers and TPS holders. What we should be talking about today is cybersecurity attacks. What we should be talking today about is funding that addresses natural disasters. What we should be talking today about is supporting infrastructure protections, the capacity for our TSA workers to do their job. But that is not what we're talking about today. It is nice to see my Republican colleagues suddenly care about migrant children like my little sister who crossed the border at 60 pounds 20 years ago. But where were they when the Trump administration was separating families? Where were they to protect kids in our schools from gun violence? Thoughts and prayers? I grew up in church, and I know that prayer also requires action. Mr. Secretary, I want to be clear. The administration can do a better job in protecting migrant children. I agree with that. And I also look forward to working with you and all of you to make that happen. I also have to say that I am concerned that the Department of Homeland Security is considering reviving family detention. Very simply, any duration of detention is harmful. It is inhumane and it is unacceptable. It undermines the fundamental right to seek asylum. We want to argue that children are at risk. We alternatively have to argue that shutting off avenues to claim asylum will keep kids safe by keeping them in their home countries. But we have heard it. If any of you have ever been to Guatemala, to Chiquimula, to San Isidro, you will know what poverty actually feels like, what it's like to have to live every single day in danger, why you would walk 1,811 miles to get to this country. These people are fleeing their countries with unimaginable poverty. And from my own experience, you've heard me talk about in Central America, they're forced to leave their homes all the time. We must take this problem of child exploitation seriously, but we cannot do it at the expense of our children. This is why I want to talk a little bit more about family detention. And I am aware that there's been conversations around reinstating that. But as you know, people are leaving everything and everyone they know behind. And Mr. Secretary, I'm aware that it is not a final decision on this policy, but I hope to see your department and the administration lead with humanity as you have done and urge not to reinstate any policy that results in families being placed in detention centers. Mr. Secretary, can you provide a full written update on the status of the consideration of family detention to this committee?
Congresswoman, no decision has been made. I encourage an environment, a work environment where people feel free to present their ideas, and we discuss those ideas in a thoughtful and deliberate manner.
Thank you, Secretary. So if there's an update at any time, I would like to be able to receive that. Mr. Secretary, I just want to wrap up here, and I know that we talked about TSA, and I have a few seconds left, but I do want to come back to ask you a quick question about TSA. Would you please explain how expanded bargaining rights combined with increased pay are critical to improving working conditions for TSA officers?
Congresswoman, we have had challenges over the years given the unequal pay, the unfair pay of our TSA personnel and the lack of bargaining rights that they have suffered. We've had a very difficult time recruiting and retaining personnel. And we believe in fair pay for our extraordinary frontline personnel, for all of the people in the Department of Homeland Security, which is why we are seeking the funding to support that fair pay and the bargaining rights they richly deserve.
Thank you, Secretary, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. D'Esposito from New York.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to start by thanking you for your leadership, because I think one of the most important things that we're addressing today is leadership. There's so much to talk about. It seems like over the last few hours, we've spent time going back and forth about funding for Border Patrol agents. What we've failed to recognize is that we could provide all the funding that we want for Border Patrol agents. They don't want to work for you, Mr. Secretary. I've spoken to them. I've visited the border. In fact, I visited the border before even having the honor to serve as a member of Congress. I proudly served the New York City Police Department as a detective for over a decade. So I got to speak to these individuals cop on cop. They don't like how you're operating. They don't like how they're being treated. And there are many people in this room that have served this nation in our military, have served in law enforcement. And I will tell you, there is nothing worse. There is no more terrible feeling than going out each and every day and having that understanding that your so-called leader doesn't have your back. And that's exactly how they feel. We talked, someone from the other side of the aisle mentioned the fact that the border is just part of the news cycle. Well, I would have to argue that, and I'm pretty confident that the victims that we've seen of fentanyl overdoses, those that we've seen as victims of crime, of those individuals coming over our border illegally, those that have been captured and now completely at the hand of the cartel, they don't think it's just a news cycle. What it is, it's become a disaster. You mentioned that you believe we have operational control, and you see that operational control in, quote, a lens of reasonableness. Well, I will speak as a New Yorker and tell you that lens stinks, because none of us see it as reasonable. You also mentioned the extraordinary personnel. And again, as many members of this committee have had the opportunity to visit the border, and we've spoken to those brave Customs and Border Patrol agents, and when they are able to speak freely and talk about what they do on a day-to-day basis, when they don't have one of your henchmen standing around making sure they don't say anything terrible about you or about Homeland Security, they tell the truth. And they are doing the best work that they possibly can under a terrible act of leadership. And I will say that we are here today. Your failures, your dereliction of duty, your failure to uphold the oath that you took to protect this homeland, it is not a Democrat issue. It's not a Republican issue. It's an American issue. And when we go back to our home states and we talk to individuals, they don't care what party we're from. You know what they care about? They care about crime increasing in their community. They want people to have the American dream. And I think that's what we're missing here today. We want people to have the American dream. You know what we want? We want them to come through the front door. That's what we're asking. And that's what you're failing to do. So I'm going to bring it back home. Your lack of leadership has created not just the states along the border to be border states. Every state in this great nation has become a border state. In New York City alone, there are projections that the city could spend up to $1 billion, with a B, to support more than 50,000 migrants that have arrived over the past year. Now there's talk that they actually want to take these migrants from New York City and bring them to the Nassau Coliseum right in the middle of my district. So I have to ask, have you or any member of your administration been in talks with New York City to move these migrants from New York City to the Nassau Coliseum?
Congressman, not to my knowledge, but the...
And I have to say, in what world, because if there's no discussions, it's a yes or no question, in what world do you think that housing migrants in a sports facility is a good idea?
Congressman, the issues that you speak of very strongly reflect the dire and decades-long need for immigration reform. We are working within a broken immigration system.
We're also working with a broken, Mr. Secretary, with all due respect, we're also working with a broken border. And when you took the oath to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, it is your job. When you wake up in the morning, every waking hour, you should be dedicating it to protecting our border and to make sure that this homeland, the homeland that we all represent, is secure. And you're not. You're failing it, you're failing Americans, and you're failing your oath. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman yields, and I now recognize Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your service to this country. Thank you for being a man of integrity, because that somehow got lost today. You wake up every day and you serve this great country. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. Thank you to you, your department, and the public servants you serve with to protect the American people. I also want to apologize to not just you, but to anyone watching, to the staff of this committee, of all of us, for what you've had to experience here today. We are so much better than this. Our country needs us to be so much better than this, and to think about the origin of this committee as a select committee put together after 9/11 to find ourselves here today, engaging the way that we are, is unacceptable, and we shouldn't accept it. So many challenges this country faces, this committee has jurisdiction over, that we need to address together. So let's go through some of those things, Mr. Secretary. Your department defends our nation against cyber threats to a wide range of critical infrastructure. Is that correct?
We do, Congressman.
And that critical infrastructure ranges from commercial facilities to emergency services to transportation systems and beyond. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Congressman.
These cyber threats often come from certain hostile nations like Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Congressman.
Are those states the origin of some of the most frequent and severe cyber attacks on our nation?
Yes, it is. Yes, they are.
And would you agree that their targets and methods are wide-ranging and ever-changing and developing?
It's a very dynamic and complex threat landscape, Congressman.
And this would include ransomware, malware, and phishing attacks. Is that correct?
Yes, they come from adverse nation states as well as criminal organizations resident in them.
And you're here to talk about the budget. Is that correct?
I am, Congressman.
Will President Biden's budget proposal allow DHS to combat the cyber threat posed by these countries?
Yes, it does, Congressman. It calls for an increase of almost $150 million for the budget of the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency.
And on that point, with this increase, which includes, I believe, almost $100 million for implementing the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, allow the agency to better understand, manage, and reduce the risks to our critical infrastructure?
Yes, it will, Congressman. We're very grateful for that legislation.
Mr. Secretary, would you agree that domestic terrorism has emerged as one of the greatest threats to our homeland, a threat that has the potential to cause devastation to our places of worship, to our schools?
Yes, it has, Congressman.
Is that why your department designated domestic violent extremism as a national priority area, reconstituted the Faith-Based Security Advisory Council, and provided over $250 million through the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to support physical security enhancements to nonprofits at high risk of terrorist attacks?
Yes, it is, Congressman.
And I'm so glad that DHS is focused on this critical issue, because here, in this committee, as you might be aware, Republicans refuse to include any reference to domestic terrorism in their partisan committee oversight plan for this Congress, which is just completely unacceptable. Mr. Secretary, has your department had to respond to increasingly frequent and severe extreme weather events?
Yes, we have, Congressman.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but emergencies like those aren't unique to red or blue states. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Mr. Secretary, when providing support after a natural disaster, does FEMA discriminate based on the political affiliation of the elected officials from those states or localities?
No, it does not, Congressman.
No, it doesn't. So the $20.1 billion for the Disaster Relief Fund in your budget would help American families recover from devastating events regardless of where they're from. Is that correct?
That is correct, Congressman.
Thank you. My first official trip as a member of Congress was to El Paso to visit the border, because we do care about the situation at the border. But I want to be very clear about something. Congress is responsible for passing comprehensive immigration and border solutions to mitigate some of the challenges your department is facing. Is that correct?
Yes.
So let's talk about the border. Your budget provides actual solutions to border challenges, including $865 million for CIS to process asylum cases, applications for immigration benefits, and improve refugee processing. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, Congressman.
So far this year, department has encountered more than 1 million migrants at the southern border. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, Congressman, the time frame about which you're asking?
So far this year.
So far this year, we
The
have
point is
encountered-
that
yes,
you are
that is
preventing
correct.
people from entering the country. So when we talk about the number of instances, we are preventing. The DHS is doing its job, and I would just say thank you for doing your job. Thank you to all the members of your department for doing what you do, and I'm so sorry again that you had to deal with what you encountered here today. Thank you for your service to this country. I yield back the remainder of my time.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you holding this important hearing. In my home state of Florida, human trafficking is a problem that we are working very hard to combat. And to stop the exploitation and trafficking of children, it is very important. We need the federal government to partner with us and eliminate policies that are making children more vulnerable. I have here today a Florida statewide grand jury report dated March 29th, 2023, containing alarming details about federal agencies' roles in the placement of minors, unaccompanied alien children, or UACs, into unsafe and exploitative environments. Mr. Chairman, I request that this report be entered into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Among other things, the report shows that the number of UACs at the southern border increased from 27,000 to 127,000 between fiscal years 2015 and 2022. In fiscal year 2022, over 13,000 of these minors were housed in Florida. According to the report, the children interviewed knew very little about the individuals that transported them during their journey to the border, and disclosed that the individuals who transported them were coyotes. One child disclosed that during her journey, several members of her group were robbed, attacked by gang members, decapitated, and raped, and she disclosed that she herself was one of the victims of rape. The Florida grand jury report also found that roughly 40% of those initially categorized as UACs were age 17 or above, and included reference to the case of a 24-year-old murderer who made his way through the UAC system in order to ultimately murder his Florida sponsor. The killer's mother reported that he had entered the U.S. fraudulently because right there at the shelter, they helped me. This was a reference to financial aid and other assistance given by charitable organizations on both sides of the border. He presented fraudulent documents which were not spotted. As we work to protect children from being exploited, trafficked, and left vulnerable to deadly drugs, we need to have a clear picture of the role that our federal government, including the policies of the Department of Homeland Security, what they are and how they are affecting these children, and where we need to continue to improve them. So, Secretary Mayorkas, I'd like to start there. When Border Patrol agents encounter an unaccompanied child, does DHS cross-reference the UC portal to determine any simple details, such as, has this child been through our system and been processed before?
Congresswoman, I very much appreciate your concern for the well-being of children and your concern in the fight against human trafficking. It is precisely why, for the first time in the department's history, we have created a sixth mission set in our quadrennial Homeland Security review, and that is the fight against human trafficking. It is precisely why we are devoting increased funds to the Center for Combating Human Trafficking, the CCHT. Just so that you understand, if I may, our role when we receive an unaccompanied child at the border, when we encounter an unaccompanied child. It is our legal responsibility under the law to transfer that unaccompanied child to the Department of Health and Human Services within
After 72 hours, correct? Now, when you have that child for 72 hours, are you in fact verifying that that child is a minor?
Of course, we seek to verify the age of that child, the identity of that child, before we transfer that child to the Department of Health and Human Services. And
do you cross-reference the portal to make a determination of whether or not that child has actually been put into our system, whether that child has been processed through your system before?
Congresswoman, I would be pleased to provide you, after this hearing, with the details of what exactly our Border Patrol agents do when they encounter an unaccompanied child and how they verify the identity and age of that child. I'd be very pleased to provide you with that information, and I must say that our Border Patrol agents do extraordinary work in the most difficult of circumstances for caring for those children.
Do those agents who are on that front line of their first port of contact for those children have any specialized training in trauma-informed care or verification of legal documents such that there's any quality control on ensuring that they know what they're seeing and they understand how to speak to these children?
Congresswoman, the Border Patrol agents are trained in a number of different areas, given the dynamism and complexity of the challenges that they confront, and I'd also be very pleased to provide you with details about that.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Ms. Clark from New York.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Let me first start by thanking you, Secretary Mayorkas, for joining us today, as well as thank our Chairman, Green, and Ranking Member Thompson for convening this afternoon's hearing or this morning's hearing. Let me also say how disgraceful the display of rhetoric here today targeting our secretary was for this committee. As a member of the committee for my entire tenure here in the House of Representatives, this committee has always been bipartisan. It's always been focused on the preservation, protection of the homeland. But today's display of just downright disgusting behavior is not indicative of who we should be and who we are as a committee. So I'd like to, first of all, lift up and thank and commend the Biden administration and you, Secretary Mayorkas, for rebuilding the department and your critical efforts to support DHS's overall mission. Your job is not an easy one, and since 9/11, it has never been easy. It's easier when you have cooperation from a bipartisan panel of members of Congress that want to seek out solutions to the myriad of challenges that we face. So today I'd like to focus on cybersecurity, Mr. Secretary. My first question is about the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act, or CIRCIA, a landmark piece of legislation that I authored in the last Congress, which directs CISA to stand up mandatory cyber incident reporting requirements for critical infrastructure. It's been a little over a year since Congress passed CIRCIA, and I'd like to know what progress has been made in that 1 year, and how quickly might we expect to see a final rule?
Congresswoman, one of the key elements of our cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency's work is to partner, to be an agency of partnership, because we so much rely on the private sector. The majority of our country's critical infrastructure rests in the private sector. So CISA, as it is known by its acronym, has engaged with the public in preparation for the issuance of a notice of proposed rulemaking to implement the regulations, bringing that important legislation to life. I believe, if I recall correctly, that the agency was given 18 months to promulgate those regulations, and it is well underway in its work in that regard.
Very well. How is DHS working with the other regulators like FCC and SEC to streamline and harmonize incident reporting requirements?
Congresswoman, one of the critical needs for our country is to harmonize the different regulations that we have with respect to cybersecurity. And we actually have a council that we chair in the Department of Homeland Security to bring the different agencies together to achieve, to the best of our abilities, to the best of the authorities that each respective agency holds, to bring that harmonization to life, and we are well underway in that regard. I know that council has met, if I'm not mistaken, several times already.
Last Congress, I authored legislation to authorize a critical CISA OT security program called Cybersecurity, which allows CISA to enter into enhanced strategic partnerships to monitor cyber threats to OT systems. Since that program was authorized, how has DHS worked to grow and stabilize CyberSentry? And what do you see as next for the program?
Congresswoman, I will have to follow up with you in response to your question to provide you with the information you have asked of me.
Very well. Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned about political theater within our committee. There are multiple ways that we can address the issues that have been raised with respect to our southwest border. The only one that we have not discussed in this committee, which is part of our jurisdiction, is comprehensive immigration reform. I hope that you will work with the Judiciary Committee. As the daughter of immigrants, I find the discussion here abhorrent. This is a nation built by immigrants, for immigrants. Not anyone sitting here today is native to this land. And for us to have this type of rhetoric in the 21st century, grown adults who espouse Christian values, I think we need to rethink and recalibrate who we are as human beings, because the discussion that was held here today was disgraceful, despicable. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Luttrell from Texas.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. How are you today?
Good afternoon, Congressman.
I have a line of questioning I was going to ask you, and I got to tell you, just to mimic Ms. Clark's statements, I think this committee needs to do a better job. If we spend as much time solving problems instead of wire brushing ourselves, there's a point in time I forgot you were in here. And I want to ask you face to face, man to man, will you meet with me in the next few weeks so we can hash this out? Because what I seem to think that I'm hearing is there's a breakdown in communication and the understanding of either vernacular or language that either makes you responsible for what we have of our expectation. And I think there's a breakdown there. So I'm asking you, would you meet with me so I can tell you what I'm seeing from my district in Texas?
Congressman, I would gladly.
Yes or no? Thank you.
I would gladly meet with you.
Thank you. And so I represent Texas 8. We are basically a landing zone for the border, okay? And I want to bring two names to your attention, Mr. Ethan Griffin, age 22, and Mr. Joshua Gillahan, age 14, both perished from fentanyl, okay? And I don't care what administration you're talking about now, right? I'm past red and blue, okay? Joshua died 8 months ago, okay? Here are my numbers, sir, in my district. In 2020, 325 deaths. In 2021, 538 deaths. 2022, 600 plus, and the number is growing this year. Now, sir, you are the commander of the ship. I have to point my finger at you. I wanted you to address me and say, what would you say to the mothers of these two young men, those babies, because they're in the room? I'm not going to politicize you, sir, but I would ask you that when you go to Mr. Pfluger's office, I'm going to have those mothers there. Would you please address that? Because here's my issue, sir. Every day, I run into those mamas. Every day. And I have to tell them, I'm working on it. Every day in my district, they ask me, why isn't the border secure? What can we do to enhance border security so we are not overwhelmed? And every day, your name comes up. And I can't imagine, after seeing what I've seen today, how challenging it is to you to lead this department. We will do better. I give you my word as a Texan and as a congressman that with this committee, we will do better to provide you guidance as a united body so you can secure our border. That's what we need. Do you agree to that?
Congressman.
Whoa. All right, hey, back that up, buddy. I identify as a man, and I don't have any pronouns.
Congressman. I apologize. Congressman, we need to work together to address the challenges that have been the subject of this hearing. And fentanyl and the scourge of fentanyl is one of them. Let me share with you that the scourge of fentanyl is not new to 2023. It is not.
I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying that at all, sir. What I'm saying is these numbers, and again, you heard me say, I don't care what administration you're talking about, these numbers are progressively getting worse. So, you and I, and this committee, and this body politic, need to put aside our differences because it is the American public that are suffering. No wonder they're pissed at us. Yes?
Agreed, Congressman. Let me share with you one thing that we could do, just one example of what we can do together. Fund the Department of Homeland Security for $305 million so we have a greater level of non-intrusive inspection technology to detect and
I agree
interdict.
that we need to fund. However, sir, if we're going to spend, $3 million on a private law firm to help you prep for hearings, from what I understand, the documentations that I saw today, 1.5 million already gone out the door. As a fiscally conservative man, if we want to fund a department, let's fund it. And let's just not go spending things that we don't need to spend taxpayer dollars on. How about that?
Congressman, I respectfully must say that you are conflating very serious issues with other issues that do not relate.
Which serious issue am I conflating? The border problem?
Let me-
Hey, be careful because I'm kind of on your side right now, but that can switch, especially after you call me a woman.
Congressman, I apologize. It's been a number of hours.
I've been here with you the whole time. I get it.
Yeah. Well, let me share with you. Your seat over these last few hours has been very, very different than my seat. So my level, so I apologize for the error.
You think so?
I meant
You just think because you're taking darts from this committee and didn't you just hear me say that I got to stand in front of those two mothers back there and explain to them what I'm doing to make sure their babies and other babies, what the reason that they died? I didn't think so. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Titus of Nevada.
Bullshit, man.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for so patiently and honorably responding to the slings and arrows that have been thrown at you today. I'm sorry that Ms. Lee left, since she has such a concern for human trafficking. I was going to invite her to join me on a bill that I've introduced with Representative David Joyce called the Impact Act, Human Trafficking. It would enhance your ability to combat human trafficking by establishing a Homeland Security investigation victim assistance program to train investigators and specialists, which is what she seemed to think we needed more of. I'm glad that there's $66 million in the president's budget for this very purpose, and I would just ask you if you'll be able to leverage some of that for training and for helping your own employees who have to deal with the trauma of these cases themselves and the impact it has on their mental health.
Congresswoman, yes, we would. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that you recognize how difficult this work is on the personnel who do it.
Yeah, thank you. Now go back to another point that was made about TSA, and I certainly agreed with it. Las Vegas has the 7th busiest airport. It's in my district. We have just millions of tourists who come through there. I've just lost the figure right here. But anyway, we need to have this funding for TSA, and we've seen that it's already working. You mentioned that you've got longer retention, better recruiting, better benefits, maybe the labor union issue. But I hear from my colleagues across the aisle that they want to cut non-defense spending, and I'm concerned that the pay raises for TSA might be on their list of things to do away with. Can you just one more time talk about how we need to do that for the safety of the traveling public and how much that impacts the economy of every district of people who can fly in and out safely knowing TSA is there for them?
Congresswoman, there are 3 elements to this. Number one, the pay fairness that we are hoping to achieve for our TSA personnel will better ensure their well-being. It will improve our recruiting and retention, number one. Number two, our extraordinary TSA personnel who work on the front lines ensure the safety and security of the traveling public. And third, they facilitate that travel by streamlining the process and making sure that the experience at the airport is as positive as possible.
Well, we know that our travelers to Las Vegas, we want them to have the best experience from the time they leave home to the time they get back, and that includes the whole airport experience. So we appreciate what TSA folks do, and they put themselves in harm's way on those check lines. When you've seen angry travelers, you've seen them confiscate weapons. It's not just easy job.
It is certainly not, none of our frontline jobs are easy, but the individuals who perform them are extraordinary public servants. I'm incredibly proud to work alongside them and to support them.
I'd like to see more people thank them when they search their bags as opposed to be angry and be in a hurry and get aggravated because they've had to have another search. It's for the safety of all our travelers. Now, I can't let you leave without asking you about the Sears rating for Las Vegas. You know, we're going to have the Formula One race. It's going to go right down the strip. It's going to go right through the heart of my district. You've got hotel rooms looking down on it. You've got people in those hotels. We know that can be a problem from the October 1 shooting. I know you've been working with our local agencies. I want to ask you to look very carefully at that, see if there's a way we can get a 3 rating because there are a lot of special circumstances there. And as you review that, I think you told the Senate committee that you're looking at that process generally. Is it going to be a fluid process? Can you change from one category to another depending on what you may find out or what kind of resources are brought to bear?
Congresswoman, the SEER rating, the Special Event Assessment Rating process, is indeed a fluent one. Our experts, and they are indeed experts, evaluate the information, and if there is additional information that would inform their decision with respect to the rating an event receives, then they certainly will consider it and alter their rating according to their determinations.
Well, we want that to be successful, so thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. The chair now recognizes Mr. Strong from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, Mr. Secretary. Over the last 2 years, Americans have watched as this administration has rolled back successful border policies, instead choosing chaos at the southern border. It's no wonder when under your direction, we no longer handcuff those breaking the law, but instead handcuff our Border Patrol agents from being able to do their job. I've been able to visit the southern border twice this year already. What I witness concerns every American and from both sides of the aisle. Cartels are taking advantage of our open borders to smuggle humans and drugs into our country at an alarming rate. These cartels have gained complete control of the southwest border and a significant portion of the U.S. Drug market by establishing diverse transportation routes and advanced communications capabilities. Drones are one such tool cartels are using to conduct counter surveillance, pinpoint the location of law enforcement at the border, and increase the success of smuggling operations. In a February 7th House Oversight hearing, U.S. Border Patrol testified that in the last year, one sector of the southern border alone had more than 10,000 illegal drone incursions and 25,000 detections. Not only is this a grave concern for the safety of our law enforcement officers at the border, but it is a serious threat to our national security. During that same hearing, USBP shared that our adversaries have 17 times the number of drones to continue to grow their operations. We have mentioned this already today, but I believe it worth noting again. Cartels have learned to use illegal immigrants to smuggle illicit contraband across the border. According to Homeland Security investigation, revenues from migrant smuggling have increased from roughly $500 million in 2018 to $13 billion in 2022. Again, it has been reported that cartel rush waves of aliens to the border to overwhelm Border Patrol as a decoy to allow for smuggling to go relatively unnoticed. As we have already established today, during your testimony at the Senate Judiciary hearing on March the 28th, you claimed that you were unaware this was happening. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you specifically, in the 3 weeks that have followed, have you personally examined these tactics yourself?
Congressman, I have in fact focused on these tactics for some time, and let me share with you that I am so appreciative of the fact that you brought up the issue of drones, because our counter drone, our counter UAS authority expires at the end of this year, and it is absolutely critical that that authority not only be extended, that we be reauthorized, but that it be expanded. We need to be able to work with local law enforcement. Drones are being used in a myriad of ways, in a number of different ways, to create a public safety risk.
Thank you.
We have to have the authority to counter them.
Thank you. The U.S. military needs to be notified also. Secretary Mayorkas, the facts speak volumes, and let's get the facts straight. Under the previous administration, President Trump, it is a fact our borders were much more secure. Our country was safer. Under this administration, those that crossed the border were apprehended, processed, and President Trump immediately returned them by ICE air. Under your leadership, it appears our Border Patrol agents are the ones that are being handcuffed, while illegal aliens from Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Ecuador, Haiti, Cuba, Iran, and yes, China too, are pouring into America. This budget is baffling to say the least. It proves that returning illegal aliens immediately rather than turning them loose in America is telling. The big thing in this budget that I'm concerned about, there was not increases in air transportation or for fuel. And that's one of the things that we can do that I believe will reduce costs, is to return these illegals back. It is proven that it worked. The other thing, Mr. Secretary, can you provide details about how the department intends to spend $91 million for electric vehicles, charging stations, and $32 million for electric vehicles? How many stations and vehicles will $120 million be used for, and who created this initiative?
Congressman, 2 points. I'll be very pleased to provide you with the requested details after this hearing with respect to the electric fleet that our Office of Management is working on. I want you to know that in 2021, our apprehension rate at the southern border was 81%. In 2020, it was 75%.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. McKean from Oklahoma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, thanks for being here. Today, earlier in this committee, you said I use a lens of reasonableness in defining operational control when you were talking about if we have operational control at the border. So I want to kind of go through a series of comments, and I want to discuss the concept of being reasonable. Under your watch, the Biden administration, we've had over 4.5 million people encountered entrance illegally into the United States, the highest ever in the history of our nation. That's more than the population of Oklahoma, the state of which I am in service of. And I would contend that's not reasonable. I've got in front of me here 11 different places where your office is in violation of federal law or regulation. Happy to supply this. The will of Congress, the will of the people. And my office just sent you a letter about one of those in regards to this expansion of parole instead of on a case-by-case basis. It's designed to give 30,000 illegals entrance in the United States to lower numbers, to make the numbers look better. I would contend this is not reasonable. I want to talk about tax dollars and the way our tax dollars are being spent. El Paso, the sector is overwhelmed. DHS right now, at one of 9 sectors, El Paso is spending $90,000 per flight, sending 4 of them per week to another sector of the wall area, border, and just to process them. And I would contend this is not reasonable. It's just a reshuffling of the deck chairs to make sure El Paso is not overrun. Because of climate ideology, as my colleague just talked about, you all's request to spend $91 million for electric vehicle charging stations, $32 million for electric vehicles, which is not going to secure the border. It's not going to. There's a chance those vehicles could run out of energy. And its adherence to the church of nature, I would contend it's not reasonable. Last month, your Border and Customs Patrol leader, the chief of the Border Patrol, oversees 19,000 of our patrol agents, testified to this committee that he disagreed with President Biden's decision to shut down construction of the border wall what is reasonable, and I've heard it talked about a couple of times that you're in constant communication with him, I would contend would be to listen to your expert, the guy who's in constant communication, those 19,000, who disagrees with that decision. And so let me kind of give the context of this. In 2021, the CB report said that there was $15 billion that was allocated to build or rehab a wall, the wall on the southern border, 738 miles of that with $15 billion. Around 450 miles was completed in the prior administration, the Trump administration. And then President Biden, within his first 30 days, said not another foot. He shut down what was appropriated by Congress, 250 miles of border wall construction. And he made the statement, not another foot. Because of this, the Department of Defense then had to spend $2 billion to terminate the contracts that was for something that Congress said needed to happen. I would contend that's not reasonable. It's not a good expenditure of the taxpayer monies. And it's usurping Article 1, Section 1 that says that all legislative powers should be vested in the Congress, not by executive order letting the president undermine Congress. Now we continue to spend $130,000 a day to store and maintain those sections of wall rusting and wasting on the ground. It's not reasonable. You were, and looking at your history, you were under President Obama. You served as a Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security from 13 to 16 when Obama built a 150-mile of wall in tandem with the Secure Fence Act of 2006. The Biden budget that now proposes, you all proposing to spend $4.7 billion at this for a Southwest Border Contingency Fund that's set up to deal with the surge. We look at it as a slush fund instead of building physical barriers. And I say physical barriers because I think it's important to note you served under an administration where you at some time adhered to the belief in physical barriers. There was a time where both Democrats and Republicans believed in it. Don't forget that President Biden, when he was Senator Biden, voted for the Secure Fence Act, which included physical barriers. It's not reasonable where we're at when the experts, even serving directly under you, are saying they disagree with that decision. Do you agree with your expert, Custom and Patrol Border Chief Raul Ortiz, who said before this committee last month that he disagreed with Biden's decision to shut down the construction of that 250-mile border wall that Congress appropriated funds for?
Congressman, I stand by the decision of this administration to cease construction of the wall. I should say.
Can I just reclaim my time if it's okay?
That I have approved the closing of approximately 129 gaps in completion of gates.
Mr. Chairman, just a little diligence here, 10 seconds.
10 seconds.
Okay. You were secretary under Obama when a 150-mile border wall was built. You were secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Do you disagree with what Obama directed your office to do in during your time there?
No,
when Democrats agreed with Republicans about physical barriers?
There's a three-part solution with respect to security: personnel, technology, and barriers. The wall is a particular discrete aspect of barriers with which we respectfully disagree.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Crane.
I'm sorry, before he speaks, could I just please correct the record? I said to Mr. Mayorkas we were looking for a level 3 rating. I should have said level 2, if I could correct that. Thank you.
Taken care of. Thank you, Ms. Titus. The gentleman from Texas is now recognized.
Texas, Arizona, Mr.
Arizona.
Chairman.
My apologies.
Come on.
Mr. Crane, I will do push-ups for you.
Push them out, sir.
We'll give you 7 seconds back.
All right. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for appearing before our committee. I know it's been a tough day for you, and I think that's for good reason. I want to start my comments with looking at the causation of this crisis at our southern border. You know, it wasn't more than a couple years ago during the Democratic primary that your boss, now President Biden, said during a debate, we're a nation that says, you want to flee, you're fleeing oppression, you should come. Everybody with a brain saw this coming, sir. We all saw this coming. We saw this president, during his race, roll out the red carpet. We knew what it was going to cause. Everybody shouted it from the rooftops, and now it's here. And you all want to act like it's something else. You all want to act like you didn't invite this, and you most certainly did. Sir, you said in your opening statements that You're attacking cartels and smugglers in an unequivocal way. You most certainly are not, sir. As a matter of fact, if they were in this room right now, the heads of these cartels, you know what they'd tell us? They'd say, hey, re-elect these guys again. And by all means, keep that guy right in his seat because he's our MVP. He's making it so easy for us to smuggle drugs, smuggle people, get gangs into this country, distract our Border Patrol agents, and at the same time, destroy the U.S. economy. So you're not doing a good job, sir, and that is why right here, you see that, sir? You see that one on your left? That resolution? Those are articles of impeachment that Andy Biggs, Congressman Andy Biggs, and several of us supported. Now, I've never met you before in my life. You and I have no personal beef. There's no animosity as far personally. The reason that I agreed to sign on to these articles of impeachment with my colleague and others is because of the dereliction of duty. You know, I've got graphs up here too. You can see these graphs showing what it was like at the border before you got into office and what it's like now. Here's the sad thing, sir. These aren't just graphs. They're not just numbers that have been thrown at you today. They're American families. And I'm so glad that my colleague made you or asked you to get up, turn around, and face one of them. I'm glad that you had to look at something that wasn't just a data point or a graph, but you actually had to look at a family because there's tens of thousands of them. Tens of thousands. 70,000 because of fentanyl alone. That doesn't count all the families that have been destroyed by gangsters that have come up through South America, or the families that have been destroyed because of sex trafficking. I'm glad you had to face them. You know what, sir? I actually had to face one of them in my district last week. I had to face one of them in my district last week, and it was hard. This woman was choking back tears, asking me, Congressman Crane, what are you going to do? My daughter was killed. My beautiful daughter was killed because of fentanyl. And I said, you know what? We've drafted articles of impeachment to remove Secretary Mayorkas for his dereliction of duty. You know, it's interesting, sir, because Mr. Higgins, one of my colleagues up here, noticed your smugness. I noticed it too. And you know, for somebody that has a history of working in border security like yourself and knowing, and my colleague right here, Mr. Breachin, he just pointed out that you worked for administrations where they were actually building walls. But you know what? Me and this gentleman right here went on a helicopter tour down in Texas where we flew around the border, and guess what we saw? Piles of steel just stacked up on the ground, like he said, of a wall that the American taxpayers have already paid for. And because of your dereliction of duty, and because of this president and this administration, we continue to have drugs, gang members, sex trafficking pouring into this country. And you sit there with a smug look on your face. But I noticed for a second, because I was watching your face. I was watching your face when the family behind you stood up. Mr. Pfluger asked you if you would address them. I noticed that just for a second, the smugness left your face, sir. And I'm glad that you had to feel uncomfortable today. And that's not because I don't have any humanity at all. I look at your story. I look that you immigrated here from Cuba. And you know what? I think that's great. I really do, sir. And you might not think that in this exchange right here. I think that it's a great thing that America has so many amazing immigrants here. And this side of the aisle, we're not hung up about immigration. We're not hung up about legal immigration. What we're hung up about is how you all, day one in office, came in and changed policies and started getting rid of infrastructure that was keeping our states, our counties, and our cities safe.
The gentleman's time has expired. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for you, Mr. Secretary, and we would ask that you respond to those in writing. I know you've made some commitments today to do that, and I thank you for that. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7D, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days for those written statements. And I now recognize and yield to the ranking member for his closing statement, if he'd like to make one.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you and I have had some sidebar conversations during this hearing. I think what has been displayed by the committee is not who we are as a committee. And you and I pledge that going forward, we'll make every effort to get back to the civility that this committee has been known for ever since we've been in existence. All of us represent districts, all of us have opinions, but there's a manner in which we can present the opinion and still disagree. And, you know, we talk about our families. I'm a grandfather, and some of the language and things that have gone on today, as a grandparent, I'm embarrassed. I know we are better as a committee than what we saw today. And I hope the public, if they watched, don't judge the work of this committee by this one hearing. We have a budget. We're the third largest agency in government. We do a lot. No system is perfect. We have to work toward perfection. So I work at that. Whatever our challenge along the southern border, it didn't start 2 years ago. It's been here. And so I've seen the surges, I've seen the low points, but we continue to work on it. And so it's in that spirit that I say that we need to continue to work on all the problems. We have 22 agencies that make up the Department of Homeland Security. An awful lot of work, awful lot of good people. I'm happy, as the gentle lady from Nevada mentioned, our TSOs, they absolutely have worked under difficult situations, treated less than other government employees, and in this budget is money to pay them, that increase that gets them up to where other federal employees are. We absolutely need to take care of them. Apart from that, we have a lot of missions. Cybersecurity, it is a constant challenge to us in making sure that CISA maintains its integrity and ability to protect our cyber systems. As I indicated, I'm in the midst of a tornado in my district. The response has been phenomenal. The fact that we've been able to marshal the resources of DHS to address the needs in my district, I appreciate it. But as I look at all our other districts that are represented, sooner or later, you'll have those similar kind of situations. And I want the department to be just as nimble in that. So this was supposed to be a budget hearing. It has lasted over 3.5 hours. Mr. Secretary, you've labored long and hard. I wish we could have talked about some other issues that are equally as important as the border, but unfortunately, we got focused on a single point. And your budget is very large, and that request is how we keep America safe. And the border is only one. We did not talk about our maritime border. We did not talk about our northern border. You know, I just want us to get back, Mr. Chairman. And as I said, we've talked about it, and there's nothing wrong with disagreeing. I mean, it's in those disagreements that we have some meeting of the minds. And we're setting an example, but not just this country, but the rest of the world. Our adversaries look at us. And when I look at our population makeup, you know, my ancestors came to this country in the belly of a ship as slaves. And I don't think any of us can claim the purity of being just Americans, but we have to understand our America is a global America, and we all have stories to tell. And I don't think we need to impugn anybody who's trying to come to this great country. And for a long time, Ellis Isle and other places, we worshiped and encouraged people to come and celebrate this greatness. And a comprehensive immigration policy will get us to where we need to be. And so I look for a budget that moves us in that direction. I look for a budget that we all can support. But if this budget that ultimately is presented to the House allows us not to work at securing our borders and not giving our TSOs raises that they so desperately need, compromise some of our cybersecurity missions and other missions, it'll be impossible for a lot of us to support, because the numbers that this budget, if cut, will make us more vulnerable as a nation rather than more secure. And with that, I yield back.
The ranking member yields. Thank you for your comments. I'll now recognize myself for a closing statement. Mr. Secretary, I have to thank you for sitting there for as long as you have. I know we're close to the same age, and I've had to leave twice. So I deeply appreciate your staying there and staying in the seat, and for your time today. You know, I agree with the chairman, or the former chairman, now ranking member, that we disagree on a lot of policies. I mean, we really do. And we don't have to despise someone because they disagree with us. We don't have to disparage someone because they disagree with us. And we do need to dial the rhetoric down in the country and apparently in the committee. But today I wanted to focus on the differences of opinion. And you know, I look at 1.4 million gotaways, and I wonder, who's in that group? And I know since you don't know who they are, you can't tell me. The Border Patrol guys can't tell me. Because I know right now, under your policies, that if they just turn themselves in, they're going to get processed and released into the country. So who would not want to go turn themselves into Border Patrol? Well, it's probably people that have some ill intent. You mentioned the increase in the detention and capture of felons and things like that under your watch. How many felons are in that 1.4 million gotaways? How many murderers? How many rapists? How many drug traffickers? You can't tell me. And I was really heartbroken to hear that you didn't understand the strategy of the cartel. It's almost intuitively obvious that they're sending mass waves of coyote-paid people to tie up the Border Patrol so they can send those gotaways, whether it's contraband or whatever, into our country. That really disappoints me. I think it's a failure. And what's caused it is the incentives. You've taken migrant protection protocols, all these policies. We go back to the resources, right? As I made in my opening statement, we hadn't cut Border Patrol. We haven't cut yet this massive increase in people. Again, more than 12 years of 2 previous presidents, one of which you served under. It's interesting, too, when I talked to your boss from the first administration you served, some of the things he suggested we do were undoing essentially the policies that y'all have undone. Returning to some things like remain in Mexico. This is a policy issue. It's decisions made by you and your boss that have caused this spike. It's incentivized people. And when I talked to the chief of the Border Patrol and to some of your sector chiefs as we prepare to do our transcribed interviews with them, they're saying that the return agreements have all been allowed to expire. So ICE can't even send people back to certain countries because those this is willful decisions to undo policies that were bringing the numbers down. You can't argue with that. And now suddenly we did away with those policies and the numbers are going right. I mean, it's astronomical. And it's that surge of people, and it can be well-intentioned. You can say, man, I want to help. I ran a medical missions. We went to Honduras. We went to Haiti. I want to help people who are hurting. But the drug cartels are taking advantage of this. With that open border, the mass waves of people coming, and they're taking advantage of us, and they are making billions of dollars, and we're empowering evil people with these policies. You talk about resources and wanting more resources. I want to tell you, we're going to drop a bill Friday. And that bill's going to have a lot more resources in some areas than you've even asked for. And I think you'll be very happy with many of the things in it. Now, we do undo what we believe are some of these policies that have resulted in this mass wave and the cartels being able to manipulate the situation and control 5 of our 9 sectors, as the border chief has said. But you're going to like a lot of the resource piece if you really believe that it's resources. I also want to talk a little bit about some of my colleagues. A lot of my colleagues talk about immigration reform, and I'm a small business guy, I ran a healthcare company, and we need employees in this country. There are 10 million empty jobs in America right now. I want to fix our immigration system, but if we fix that first before we secure the border, we're just doing more of what you've done, which is to incentivize people to come without the security being present, and that's just going to make it worse. And so if we can secure our border, I'm ready to sit down and do immigration reform, but not make the incentives even greater so that even more come through the illegal mechanisms. So I just wanted to share that. Very quickly about the budget. I think the budget that you presented today increases a lot of money for processing people into the country and takes away money from stopping the illegal crossings and deporting people who've come here illegally. I mean, I think that's obvious if you look at the budget and add it all up. And again, your budget's just going to incentivize more people to come. The cartels are just going to take more advantage of it. And more Americans are going to die because of the fentanyl that will come into this country. And so that's why we're opposed to this. And as I said, I believe in the testimony that you gave, Chip Roy. I think you gave some false testimony. And I elaborated on that with video. And you and I can have a dialogue about that, but that's genuinely what I believe. I will say that you requested this hearing to bring your budget to our committee. I appreciate that, and it has been alluded to or actually stated out. We have plans to bring you back, so we'll see you again. I will tell you this, Mark Green has never, I've resisted any temptations to say impeachment because I don't have the authority. This committee doesn't have the authority to do that. So when someone says Mark Green said impeach, that's just not true. But what I have said is that we've got a 5-phase plan of oversight. And we're going to look at 5 specific areas and do oversight. That's my job. That's our job on both sides of this aisle up here. And so that is going to happen, and we'll look forward to talking to you again. Thank you again for being here. And with that, the committee is adjourned.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.